Chapter 98. Her lips curled into a grim smile. Her intentions, Imperial Consort Chen's and Xian Li's intentions, but tonight, whether it was the right time, the right place, or the right people, she was afraid that it would all be for naught. Whether it was herself or this life, she would not repeat the mistakes of her previous life. Marry Xian Li. Even if she were to marry some Tom, Dick, or Harry, she would disdain to be tied together with that man. Seeing that Jiang Ruan was not moving, she pushed Jiang Ruan's arm. Jiang Ruan turned her head, and Dong Yinger could not help but be startled by the deep meaning in her eyes. Jiang Ruan's beautiful eyes were dark, like a whirlpool that could suck in people. The inky color was dense, but a large expanse of indifference covered the sky, causing people to feel a chill down their spines. After they turned around the palace wall, there were also palace maids leading Furins and young ladies in front of them. Before they could clearly see who it was, they heard a crisp and warm voice, "Ruan Mimi." She looked Jiang Ruan up and down, and the more she looked, the more dissatisfied she became. Just as she was about to ask Jiang Ruan to change into a new set of clothes, she heard Jiang Xing say, "It's getting late, don't waste time. Mimi, you should hurry on your way." Along the way, there was an unprecedented silence and solemnity. After traveling for an unknown amount of time, the carriage finally stopped. Jiang Xing was taken away by the palace eunuch leading the way to the palace to report on his mission. The womenfolk in the carriage followed the other half of the palace maids to the main hall where the womenfolk were waiting. Naturally, the Jiang Fu's carriages were not the only ones parked in front of the palace gates. The carriages of the high officials and nobles were also parked along the way. At this moment, many of the madams and young ladies of the official families alighted from their carriages and pointed at the Jiang Fu's carriages. The old Jiang madam stood at the door and was talking to Jiang Xing. When she saw Jiang Ruan, she said, "Entering the palace today, eldest girl, you must be careful, don't say the wrong thing." Jiang Su was still elegant and refined. As usual, Jiang Li had chosen a lotus green collared, full-sleeved shirt, and a light purple dress with 2 lotus flowers on one branch. Although she was dressed in a noble manner, her skin color was not as fair as Jiang Su and Jiang Ruan's, and it did not set off the noble aura of her clothes very well. Instead, it seemed a little out of place. At that time, she had been helpless, but she did not expect that it would be used in this life. She sneered in her heart. After the 2 girls got off the car, a beautiful middle-aged woman got off. She looked gentle and beautiful, but for some reason, she looked a little haggard, which made her beauty discounted. Naturally, the palace maid did not know that in Jiang Ruan's previous life, when she had just entered the palace, she had been ostracized by the other beauties because of her excessively beautiful appearance. At every turn, she would use the palace's rules to trip her up. She didn't want to offend those people, so she copied down the thousands of harsh rules in the palace and read them every day. Finally, she didn't do anything wrong. Even those who wanted to use her as a raft would not be able to find the slightest mistake. So this was their plan, so this was Xian Li's plan. Naturally, Jiang Su also felt the change in everyone's gazes. Biting her lower lip, she could not wait to tear Jiang Ruan into pieces. Ever since Jiang Ruan had returned to the Jiang Fu, her days had changed. Jiang Ruan had snatched away her position as the eldest daughter, snatched away her brother's position as the Jiang family's benefactor, and now she wanted to snatch away her reputation as the capital's #1 beauty. Jiang Ruan was slightly startled. In her previous life, this had never happened. Her expression froze, and suddenly, a smile blossomed on her face. What does this mean? Why would 8th Highness suddenly choose a fiancé without rhyme or reason? They were both young girls. Hearing people praise her appearance, Dong Yinger's face flashed a trace of crimson. Suddenly, she thought of something and mysteriously moved closer to Jiang Ruan's ear. Lowering her voice, she said, "Do you know that Imperial Consort Chen is going to choose a fiancé for 8th Highness today?" That face was extremely charming, with a faintly discernible upward curve at the corners of her eyes, black eyebrows, vermilion lips, pitch-black eyes, and snow-white skin. Not one was not beautiful, not one was not charming. However, she was born with such a bright and charming face, yet her hair was combed into a crisp, single spiral bun, which immediately dissipated some of her charm, leaving only a delicate and moving appearance. "When has Miss not been good-looking?" Lu Zhu said, "Even with such a refreshing dressing, it is difficult to abandon your natural beauty." Everyone knew that the eldest Miss of the Jiangfu could not be underestimated ever since she returned after the end of the year. However, the second Miss of the Jiangfu had changed her previous appearance of a refined fairy, and had repeatedly committed mistakes. It was in everyone's nature to watch the excitement. The Jiangfu's carriage was right in front of them, and for a moment, many inquisitive gazes were cast towards the carriage of the Jiangfu's womenfolk. Xia Yan saw the half of the crescent-shaped amber that was exposed, and her expression froze. Thinking that today, Jiang Xinji could enter the imperial court with limitless glory to receive the emperor's reward, while Jiang Chao could only lie in bed in a state of shock, she could not help but feel incomparably stuffy. Since the womenfolk were riding in the same carriage, Jiang Li naturally would not take the initiative to speak to others, and Jiang Dan also had a timid expression. Usually, Jiang Su and Xia Yan would pretend to speak gently to ease the atmosphere, but today, perhaps because of old Jiang Furen's anger, Xia Yan was too lazy to deal with them. Jiang Su was also silent, and Jiang Ruan was even less likely to take these matters to heart. She merely propped up her chin with one hand and stared at the embroidery on her clothes with the other, lost in thought. The heavens seemed to be compensating for the previous period of havoc caused by the rain. For the next few days, the sky was clear and the air was clear, and the weather was warm and harmonious. The clouds were light, the sky was azure, and the buds on the branches were spitting out some green. The color of spring quietly enveloped the capital of the Jin dynasty. The few of them laughed and joked around for a while before Kai Kei, who served by old Jiang Furen's side, came over to inform Jiang Ruan that they could set off. Lian Xiao and Bai Ji woke up early in the morning to prepare food for Jiang Ruan. Fearing that they would have to wait too long in the palace banquet, and that they could not eat too much at once, they had prepared some appetizers early. A plate of ham and egg stew, jade stock porridge, and hibiscus crisps. It was simple and light. After Jiang Ruan finished eating, Lu Zhu brought in a small rattan box and said with a smile, "There are many rules in the palace, so this servant has prepared some small snacks for Mississippi. Eating them will not ruin your makeup." She called out, "Wan Mimi." Jiang Ruan smiled slightly, "I also do not know." The haze from before was swept away, as if it had only been Dong Yinger's hallucination. Her fingers, hidden in her sleeves, slowly clenched into her palms. Jiang Ruan raised her eyes to look at herself in the mirror. She was naturally charming and beautiful, and her facial features were clear and deep. Due to her previous life's experience, in this life, she always looked like she was beyond her age. Moreover, the single conch bun was lovely, and when placed on her body, it revealed a bit of a young girl's innocence that was not usually present. Her gaze slightly deepened. In the palace in her previous life, according to the rules, one had to comb their hair in a thick and complicated style, and their hair was full of hairpins and ornaments. How could it be as refreshing and simple as it was now? A trace of coldness flashed in Xia Yan's eyes, but she still did not say anything. With a smile on her face, she began to talk to the palace maid who was leading the way. Jiang Li had long been impatient, and upon seeing this scene, she hurriedly followed. The old Jiang madam could only give up, and after giving a few more instructions, she turned to Xia Yan and coldly said, "Today, I will hand over these servant girls to you. You must be careful, and do not make any mishaps." Even so, she still wanted to enter the palace, which was indeed meaningful. "You still know that natural beauty cannot be abandoned." Lian Xiao squinted her eyes and laughed, "You really know how to talk." Jiang Su stood next door. As before, she was dressed in a light white silk embroidered for blessings Rui pattern with a neckline and narrow sleeves. She was wearing a floor-length moon skirt with pinched teeth embroidered Rui pattern, and a white jacquard muslin soft satin draped over her body. Her hair was combed into an exquisite flying immortal bun, with Buddha beads inserted in her hair and a blue phoenix crown in her hand. On her wrist, there was a fine suet jade bracelet. Her demeanor was delicate, and at first glance, she looked like a pure and clean fairy from the ninth heaven. However, when she got closer, she could see that she had put on a thick layer of makeup, presumably to cover up the scars that had been left in the thorns some time ago. Xia Yan was so angry that her face turned pale. Jiang Xing smiled, turned around, and mounted his horse. Jiang Su's expression froze for a moment, and then, as if nothing had happened, she said, "Mother, let's go." Lian Qiao said, "That's true." At first glance, there was only a smear of gorgeous pink, and it was rather tacky, not as elegant as Jiang Su's matchless beauty. When that person alighted from the carriage, she stood beside Jiang Su, slender and elegant, with her own charm. Everyone couldn't help but look at her face, and couldn't help but hold their breath. Along the way, some of the Furins could tell that there were a few young ladies in the Jiangfu. Putting aside the two Shu daughters, eldest Jiang Miss and second Jiang Miss each had their own merits, but in terms of bearing and etiquette, eldest Miss was a cut above. Although second Miss did not make any mistakes, she appeared stiff and immature, and was not as natural and proper as Jiang Ruan. She had helped Xia Yan out of trouble, and normally, the old Jiang madam would not have said anything if she had heard it. However, at this moment, her expression did not soften, and she coldly said, "It's good that she knows." She then flicked her sleeves and left without looking back. Seeing that these young ladies each had their own merits, the old Jiang madam's gaze fell on Jiang Ruan, and she could not help but frown. "Why are you dressed like this?" In the old Jiang madam's eyes, it was not important how Shu daughters dressed, as long as they did not go out of line. However, Di daughters were different, as they represented the Fu's face when they went out. Even Jiang Su, who was elegant and refined, wore clothes of the best quality. Entering the palace was not the same as being a guest in the Fu of other officials. What was important was dignity. Although Jiang Ruan's appearance was good, this outfit was a little too ordinary. It did not appear formal, and was not even as luxurious as Jiang Li's. Everyone looked at her, and then looked at Jiang Su. With this comparison, the makeup on Jiang Su's face was a little too thick, and the hairpin in her hair seemed a little too complicated. A fairy was not so fresh, but this lively and fragrant beauty had a completely different kind of beauty. Our Fu has a maidservant whose elder sister is serving in the palace. Yesterday, when she went home to visit her relatives, she told us. This matter is no longer a secret, and all the servants in the palace know about it. Dong Ying stamped her feet. "My mother insisted that I dress like this today, saying that it would be great if I entered the palace and became the 8th prince's consort. But I don't want to marry 8th Highness at all. I only want to find a person that I truly love and spend the rest of my life with." Dong Ying thought for a moment, then suddenly smiled. "But there are so many women in the palace tonight, and 8th Highness will not take a fancy to me." "Ruan Mimi, you have always been smart. Quickly think of who will catch the eye of Imperial Consort Chen and become the 8th prince's consort." Jiang Ruan smiled. "Dong Jijie is the one who is very beautiful." Just as everyone saw the elegant and refined fairy, they saw a red shadow flash in the carriage. The next second, the curtain of the carriage was lifted, and a pretty figure walked out. The old Jiang madam looked at Xia Yan with a rather dissatisfied expression. She had long disliked this daughter-in-law of hers. Zhao Mei was too warm and pure, and brainless. This daughter-in-law was also too scheming. These days, Jiang Su and Jiang Chao had met with frequent mishaps, and she was even more displeased with Xia Yan. Two perfectly fine children had been raised like this by Xia Yan. Just thinking about it made the old Jiang madam extremely angry. On the other hand, the palace maid could not help but flash a trace of surprise in her eyes. There were many daughters of wealthy families who abided by the rules, and there were also many who excelled in etiquette, but there was no one who could be so outstanding. Looking at the way she walked, her eyes were focused, her steps were graceful, and her skirt did not move in the slightest. Her hands were naturally crossed, her chin was slightly raised, and her eyes were focused. Her expression was humble but not lowly, noble but not arrogant. She grasped it very well. Her steps were very steady, and there was no fear or curiosity in her eyes that others would have when entering the palace for the first time. All kinds of emotions were hidden in that pair of beautiful and charming eyes, making it difficult for others to see clearly. For the old Jiang madam, Jiang Xing had performed a meritorious service and gained face for the Jiang family. Jiang Xing was the glory of the Jiang family. As for the conflict between Jiang Xing and Xia Yan, it was just a young person's temporary thinking. They were all people of the Jiang Fu, and even if the bones were broken, the tendons were still connected. In the end, she still had to think for the Jiang Fu. Baiji helped Jiang Ruan with her hair and said, "What else is there to prepare? Don't forget." Her hands were very deft, and with a few flips, she managed to create a beautiful single spiral bun. She picked out a light red rose hairpin from a jewelry box and gently inserted it into Jiang Ruan's hair. She smiled and said, "It's done." Dong Ying saw Jiang Ruan's attire and said, "Ordinarily, I know that you are beautiful, but I did not know that your attire today is actually somewhat interesting." Jiang Su smiled and said, "Grandmother, mother is not a child, and naturally understands these things. Grandmother dotes on mothers so much that you explain everything clearly, no matter how big or small, this granddaughter will be jealous." I heard that it was Imperial Consort Chen's idea. Dong Ying's voice became even lower. Think about it, His 8th Highness has now reached the age to marry, but he does not even have a Tongfang by his side. Her face was somewhat red, but she still continued, "Imperial Consort Chen is anxious. Tonight, there are many young ladies of noble families at the palace banquet, and Imperial Consort Chen said that she would personally choose a marriage partner for His 8th Highness. His Majesty has already given his approval. Every Fu's womenfolk had been arranged for a separate palace maid to receive them." As Xia Yan spoke to the palace maid, her gaze involuntarily swept over Jiang Su. Long before entering the palace, she had invited an extremely reputable Momo from outside the Jiang Fu to teach Jiang Su etiquette, all so that Jiang Su could amaze the world with a brilliant feat. Jiang Su's talent had spread far and wide, but this was the first time that she had come to the palace. There were many opportunities in the palace, and as long as there was a sliver of possibility, one's future life could be vastly different. After the beautiful woman alighted from the carriage, she was not in a hurry to leave. Instead, she stood beside the carriage, waiting for the person inside to alight. After Jiang Su alighted from the carriage, the surrounding people were shocked. Even though Jiang Su's reputation was not as good as it had been in the past, she was, after all, elegant and refined, lovely and moving. Just by standing there, she made people feel that she should be taken good care of. Who would have thought that such a devastatingly beautiful fairy would have such a corrupt character? Even those who had some suspicions before, upon seeing Jiang Su's moving appearance, were shaken. Today, Jiang Su had deliberately dressed up to cover up the scars on her face. In addition, her clothes and accessories were all meticulously made, so naturally, it was easy to catch people's eyes. The departing carriage stopped at the entrance of the Jiang Fu. It was carved in gilded sandalwood, exuding a faint fragrance. The carriage that Miss Jiang sat in was even more exquisite and small. The curtains of the carriage were the color of a sunny day after a rain, and there were tiny sachets hanging from them. Jiang Wan looked at her and asked, "How did Dong Jie know?" Lian Xiao was also astonished and said, "Miss looks quite good like this." Jiang Wan raised her eyes and saw that it was Dong Yinger. She was also rather meticulously dressed today, and it was an excellent match for her generous and lively temperament. After she and Xia Yan greeted each other, she spoke to the capital governor's madam, then took Jiang Ruan's arm and walked to the side, whispering to each other as they walked. Xia Yan was very dissatisfied in her heart. The old Jiang madam had lectured her in front of everyone, which made her lose a lot of face. At once, she clenched her fists and took a deep breath in her heart. Only then did she raise a gentle smile and say, "Daughter-in-law will listen to mother's teachings." A peach-colored brocade gown inlaid with 3 plates of gold, a floor-length dress with rose embroidery flowers, and a gold-colored embroidery with intricate beads and patterns. Like a rose that had just bloomed, it still carried the fragrance of morning dew. It was young and tender, but it did not obscure the elegance of the wind. She had not applied any makeup, and there was only a single rose ornament in her hair. On her hand, there was no extra jewelry, only a bracelet that emitted a faint blue light. Although it was unknown what material it was made of, it was obviously not an ordinary item. Xia Yan boasted that she came from a scholarly family and attached great importance to matters of etiquette. It was difficult to conceal her contentment when she spoke to the palace maid, but she overlooked the contempt in the palace maid's eyes. What kind of person was that palace maid? She had been in the palace for so many years, and had seen many more noble people than Xia Yan. Although Xia Yan understood etiquette, Xia Cheng had once been a bastard son, so he did not need to be properly educated. It was inevitable that Xia Yan would have her hands and feet bound with a sense of pettiness. Even Jiang Su, whom she had painstakingly cultivated, also had some of the same cautiousness as Xia Yan. Although she tried her best to appear calm and indifferent, in front of these people with unique insight, there was still a sense of hypocrisy. The curtain of the carriage was lifted by the maid, and the first girl to come down was dressed in a light yellow dress. She had delicate features, and her expression was timid and lovable. Immediately after, a young girl dressed in a lotus green dress walked down. She was also very beautiful, but appeared slightly mean, and her clothes were overly gorgeous. Jiang Dan was dressed in a duck yellow robe embroidered with cranes. She had a round collar and slanted front blouse, and her hair was styled in a unique yaotai bun. Beside Jiang Su and Jiang Dan, she looked like a small, lovable animal. Although she was not outstanding, she had a special kind of daintiness. Her etiquette was not like that of a young lady from an official's family. It was as if she was a noble who had lived in the depths of the palace for many years. Her every move was filled with familiarity and etiquette, and not a single step was wrong. Chapter 99. The Jade Level Hall was already filled with all the furins and young ladies. Almost all of them were relatives of high officials and nobles. There were also many nobles in the palace who took care of them. At this moment, they were all gracefully and quietly exchanging greetings. They did not appear overly formal or presumptuous. On the high seat, the empress sat in the middle, and the 4 consorts sat below her with a smile. At this moment, they were also smiling at the furins and young ladies below, occasionally exchanging a few words of greeting. They looked very cordial. The young eunuch who was waiting to deliver the order announced loudly, "The madam of the minister's fu has arrived." Everyone's gaze uniformly turned towards the door. The Minister of War, Jiang Quan, had recently been in the limelight in the capital. This was not because of anything else, but because eldest young Master Jiang, who had just returned to the capital, was currently the youngest deputy general in the Great Jin dynasty. Moreover, as soon as he returned to the capital, he had repeatedly performed meritorious deeds. It was said that he had been favored by His Majesty. It could be assumed that in the future, his official career path would be smooth and he would have a bright future. As furins, they would more or less hear a word or two from their masters. There was no lack of young ladies present who had reached the marriageable age. Some of them had thoughts in their hearts that they wanted to climb up the Jiang family's door. Now that they heard that Minister Jiang's family had arrived, they naturally cast their gazes in their direction. Xia Yan and the others actually thought that the furins were looking at her, and could not help but straighten their backs. The smile on their faces was gentle and dignified, and they walked very steadily. Everyone watched in silence. Xia Yan and Jiang Su appeared gentle and elegant. Jiang Li was in high spirits but slightly frivolous. Jiang Dan was delicate and timid, and could not stand up to such a grand occasion. On the contrary, Jiang Wan, who walked behind Xia Yan, walked at a pace that was neither fast nor slow. There was a bright smile on her lips. Her smile was bright and charming, and her every movement revealed a noble elegance that only people in the palace possessed. Looking at her like this, everyone remembered that Xia Yan was not Jiang Xin biological mother. Jiang Wan and Jiang Xin were real brother and sister. If Jiang Xin were to be promoted and become rich in the future, Jiang Wan would also rise with him. Looking at Jiang Ruan's ability to advance and retreat, even when entering and leaving a grand occasion like the palace banquet, she did not seem the slightest bit nervous. She did not seem like someone who had been raised in the wilderness. Some of the madams also had other thoughts in their minds. They were wondering if they should settle this young lady of the Jiang family back home as soon as possible. Xia Yan and the rest stepped forward to pay their respects to the empress. The empress was over 40 years of age and had taken good care of herself, so she did not appear to be very old. She had been in a high position all year round, but did not have the air of superiority. Perhaps it was because she was not favored and only had the emperor's respect and the crown prince's son. At first glance, she looked no different from an ordinary official's wife. She smiled and motioned for Xia Yan and the rest to rise, her expression very sincere and cordial. Consort Xian was slightly younger and appeared to be cute and lovely. She had a kind of naivety about her. It was no wonder that she gave birth to the fourth prince, Xian Lang, who had such a mediocre son. Concubine Da was older, and she was dignified and virtuous, worthy of the word Da. The fifth prince, Xianhua, was also very reliable in the imperial court. He was loyal, filial, brave, and resolute. At least, he was a virtuous person. Consort Shu was born beautiful and charming. If Imperial Consort Chen was said to be the misty rain in a corner of Jiangnan, then Consort Shu was a smear of light in a foreign grassland. Her temperament was also very capricious and shrewd. Princess He had inherited her beauty, and also her temperament. She was equally capricious and domineering. Sitting next to the empress, the one who appeared to be the most gentle and beautiful was Imperial Consort Chen. If the empress and the other consorts were said to have some of the elegance and bearing of the nobles of the imperial palace, this one was like an ordinary young girl from Jiangnan. There was not the slightest trace of a refined air about her. Sitting here, she seemed to be out of tune with the imperial palace. It was as if she had brought this area into the misty rain of Jiangnan. Jiang Wan smiled and bowed, but her heart seemed to have stopped at that moment. The people sitting here were all old acquaintances from her past life. It was just that she was too lowly and could not often see these consorts. However, Imperial Consort Chen was an exception. Not only did she not ridicule or belittle her like the other consorts, but she would often summon her to the palace of contemplation to talk. Imperial Consort Chen had a gentle temperament and was also Xian Li's birth mother. In her past life, Jiang Wan had regarded her as a close friend and also as an older sister. She was a relative that was worthy of her trust in the ice-cold palace. However, the things that this Imperial Consort Chen did behind her back, in the end, made her feel as if everything was a joke. She was like a sinister snake beauty. Hidden in her gentleness was a fatal trap. She and Xianli were the same kind of people. They were completely cold and unreservedly used, then abandoned and killed. Imperial Consort Chen looked at Xia Yan and the others and suddenly said, "You must be eldest Jiang Miss, right? Come forward and let Ben Gong have a look." The empress was startled and looked at Jiang Wan thoughtfully. Jiang Li unwillingly glanced at Jiang Wan, unable to conceal the jealousy in her eyes. Jiang Dan lowered her head, not daring to raise her eyes. Jiang Su's face stiffened, as if she couldn't believe it. Jiang Wan slowly raised her head. In the split second that she raised her head, the smile at the corner of her lips disappeared. When she raised her head, she saw a slightly cold and indifferent face. Imperial Consort Chen carefully looked at her and did not seem to see the displeasure on her face. She smiled and said, "Truly a beautiful child." When the surrounding madams saw this scene, they began to discuss in low voices. Dong Yinger, who was sitting on the side, felt a little uneasy. She recalled that her mother had previously mentioned that Imperial Consort Chen had the intention of choosing a consort for the eighth prince. She could not help but break out in a cold sweat for Jiang Ruan. Jiang Ruan indifferently said, "Thank you, Nyang Nyang, for your undeserved praise. Ruan Nyang does not deserve it." Her words could not be said to be warm, and there was not even the most basic of respect. There was only a faint resistance. When this resistance was heard by Imperial Consort Chen, she paused for a moment. After a moment, her smile became more amiable. "I wonder if Jiang Furen, eldest miss, is betrothed?" Xia Yan's body stiffened, and an indescribable fire suddenly erupted in her heart. Jiang Ruan, it was Jiang Ruan again. What kind of person was this Imperial Consort Chen? She was the most beloved woman in the palace, yet the first person she had inquired about was Jiang Ruan, not Jiang Su Su. Could it be that these people were all blind? Jiang Ruan was born with a foxy face, and with one look, one could tell that she was not a peaceful person. However, even though she had 1,000 thoughts in her heart, her face did not show the slightest trace of it. She still replied humbly, replying to Nyang Nyang's words, "One Nyang is only 11 this year, and has yet to betroth to anyone." "Ah, that's good." The smile on Imperial Consort Chen's beautiful face became even more sincere. That spotlessly white and smooth face seemed to be covered with a faint layer of mist, and her emotions were unexpectedly difficult to guess. Her words were shocking. "Such a lovely child, of course we can't just casually marry him. Ben Gong seems to like eldest Miss Jiang very much, and I really wish to personally betroth her." These words were too explicit, and the faces of the surrounding Furens could not help but reveal a complicated expression of surprise and understanding. Consort Xian looked at Jiang Ruan with great interest, Consort De did not bat an eyelid, and the Empress smiled without moving. However, Consort Shu could not help but speak up. "What is Chen Jijie saying?" "In the end, this marriage arrangement still depends on whether the young miss likes it or not. Could it be that Chen Jijie is also getting old, and also likes to do these things that only icemen do?" Consort Shu and Imperial Consort Chen had always been at odds. Consort Shu could not bear to see Imperial Consort Chen acting subservient and aloof from the world of mortals. Of course, more importantly, she was jealous that Imperial Consort Chen had such an astonishingly talented son like Xianli. However, the child that crawled out of her belly was a daughter, which meant that no matter how much she was favored, she would not have a son who could be the heir to the throne. Although the fifth prince's popularity was also quite high, Consort De was not favored, and could even be considered to be very low-key. In comparison, Consort Shu hated Imperial Consort Chen the most. Whatever Imperial Consort Chen said, Consort Shu would retort. When Imperial Consort Chen heard Consort Shu's words, she was not angry, and only looked at Jiang Ruan with a smile without saying a word. She was born with gentle features, and when she looked at someone with such a gentle smile, those who did not know her would think that she truly loved Jiang Ruan, and that she could not bear to part with her. Jiang Ruan's gaze was slightly lowered, and she did not meet Imperial Consort Chen's gaze. Outsiders looked at her bashfully, but no one knew that at this moment, her heart was surging with hatred. In just a few short minutes, it was as if two masters were exchanging blows. The Furens and young ladies present could not see anything, and only Jiang Ruan herself knew what she was thinking. How was Imperial Consort Chen's gaze gentle? It was clearly that of a poisonous snake eyeing its prey. Poisonous snakes, she naturally had a way to deal with them. Imperial Consort Chen's generosity towards Jiang Ruan caused Xia Yan's heart to feel extremely stifled. Her following answers were somewhat perfunctory, and in the end, she still revealed some reluctance. If this was in the past, then it would have been fine, but after what Great Master Huiju had said about her being a jinx, everyone began to doubt the virtuous and magnanimous attitude that she had previously pretended to be. At this moment, with her actions, everyone was even more certain that the minister's wife was, in fact, a person with a sweet face but a bitter heart. Otherwise, why would Imperial Consort Chen deliberately inquire about Jiang Yuan? Imperial Consort Chen asked a few more questions, and the Empress waved for Jiang Yuan to withdraw. Jiang Yuan had just followed Xia Yan to sit down when Dong Ying'er got up and walked to Jiang Yuan's side to sit down. In a low voice, she said, "Just now, I was really worried to death about you. Are you all right?" After saying this, she said with some admiration, "Wan Mimi, you are really bold. Just now, I saw that you were talking to Imperial Consort Nyang without a trace of nervousness. If it had been me, I'm afraid that I would have long been scared speechless." Jiang Yuan smiled, "There's nothing to be afraid of. I didn't do anything, so I won't be punished." Dong Ying'er said with some hesitation, "But Imperial Consort Nyang seems to like you very much. Could it be that she wants to marry you to His 8th Highness?" Realizing that her words were somewhat overstepping her boundaries, Dong Ying'er looked at Jiang Yuan uneasily. Seeing that Jiang Yuan's expression did not change, she slightly relaxed and said, "Imperial Consort Nyang usually rarely cares so much about people, but today, she pulled you aside and talked for a long time. Wan Mimi, don't blame me for being overly sensitive. I'm afraid that right now, all the Furens present here are thinking the same thing as me. If that's really the case, what should you do?" "Really what?" Jiang Yuan asked in reply. "It won't happen." Her tone was not as gentle as usual, and it carried a faint chill. When Dong Ying'er heard this, her heart skipped a beat. Thinking that Jiang Yuan was angry and unwilling to marry 8th Prince, she hurriedly said, "You don't have to worry too much, I'm just making wild guesses. Perhaps Imperial Consort Nyang simply likes you. You're still so young, even if it's really the case, there's no rush." This consolation was too feeble, and Dong Ying'er herself also felt guilty. However, from beginning to end, Jiang Yuan did not show any special emotions, as if she was just a bystander watching other people's affairs. After a while, seeing that it was almost time, the Empress got up and called all the Furens and young ladies to the main hall to start the palace banquet. In the main hall, the Emperor and the male side of the banquet had already taken their places. Because the flood had just passed and the state treasury was a little tight due to the disaster relief, everything at the banquet was simple and not extravagant. It was a far cry from the extravagance of the past. Even the dishes and pastries served at the banquet were very simple. The womenfolk sat down at the female side of the banquet. The Emperor and Empress sat on the high seats, and next to them sat the current Empress Dowager, Empress Dowager Ida. Empress Dowager Ida was now 60 years old, and there were already streaks of white at her temples. The turquoise gold thread inlaid with jade and auspicious cloud pattern buckles were luxurious and imposing. Even from the current Empress Dowager Ida's face, one could still vaguely see the elegance of the past. At that time, Empress Dowager Ida was known as the #1 beauty of the Great Jin dynasty. Her facial features were slightly heroic, and when she was young, she had 2 sons and a daughter with the late emperor. When the 8 princes fought for the throne, in order to quell the rebellion and ensure that the emperor ascended to the throne, she sacrificed her eldest son. She even allowed her daughter, Princess Yuan Rong, to marry into another country and borrow troops from the Great Jin to help the new emperor ascend to the throne. It could be said that without Empress Dowager Ida, there would be no Great Jin dynasty today, and there would be no emperor. Empress Dowager Ida was a person who acted swiftly and decisively, even a little callous. She looked at the people below her indifferently, and the ruby armor on her fingers emitted a threatening luster. When she saw a person at the female side of the banquet, Empress Dowager Ida was suddenly startled. She involuntarily sat up straight and looked at that person. It was a young girl who still looked immature. Because she was sitting at the lower banquet, her face could not be seen clearly, and only the top of her black hair could be seen. Her hair was combed into a simple single spiral bun, and on top of it was a magnificent rose hairpin. She wore a peach-pink dress that was simple and warm. Among the well-dressed young ladies, she appeared particularly fresh and pretty. Although they were too far apart, the young girl seemed to suddenly feel Empress Dowager Ida's gaze, and suddenly raised her head. When she saw Empress Dowager Ida's expression clearly, she did not panic. After a slight astonishment, she returned a smile to Empress Dowager Ida. That smile was clean and clear, but it also had a kind of maturity that did not match her age. It actually overlapped with another person in Empress Dowager Ida's memory. With great difficulty, she resisted the urge to go down and pull that young girl back. After that young girl finished laughing, she went back to talking with the young ladies around her, as if she had not noticed them at all. Empress Dowager Ida, however, sat upright in her seat, slightly absent-minded. As Jiang Yuan and Dong Yinger spoke, the corners of her lips involuntarily curled up slightly. From the corner of her eyes, she saw that Empress Dowager Ida was sitting motionless in her seat, and she could also feel her gaze following her. Jiang Yuan picked up the teacup in front of her and took a sip. It seemed that her original goal had been achieved. It must be known that for this simple goal, this simple action, she had practiced dozens of times in front of the mirror overnight. At the male side of the banquet, it was assumed that the rewards had already been bestowed. Seeing the smile in Jiang Xing's eyes, it must have been a very generous reward. However, Jiang Quan's expression was not very good. The male and female side of the banquet were seated separately. Gu Ida had not seen Jiang Yuan for a long time since the last time. At this moment, he saw Jiang Yuan sitting at the female side of the banquet. The longer the days passed, the more moving she became. His gaze towards her was incomparably warm. There was a gentle smile on Xian Li's lips, and it seemed that there was no difference from the past. However, his left hand unconsciously rubbed it. This action was something he often did when he was in a bad mood. Obviously, regarding the matter of the Prime Minister's foo, even if he tried his best to appear indifferent, it was still difficult for him to conceal the melancholy in his heart. Today, he was dressed in a black brocade robe embroidered with a golden qilin treading on fire and burning wind at the collar. This made his temperament even colder, and his appearance was incomparably handsome. Many of the girls at the female side of the banquet were secretly stealing glances at him. Not long after, another beautiful young girl came from outside the banquet. This young girl was about 14 or 15 years old. She was dressed in a feather blue brocade robe with a golden pheasant heart collar. She was wearing a floor-length, silver-red embroidered skirt with dark embroidery. She was also wearing a gauze embroidered with multicolored flowers and plants. This was already a very gorgeous attire, but when she wore this kind of attire, it did not appear to be mixed up. Instead, it had a kind of gorgeous beauty. Her facial features were deep, and she had a kind of exotic charm. She walked forward and smiled, "Imperial Father. Why have you only arrived now?" The emperor rebuked her, but his tone was very intimate. Princess He was deeply favored by the emperor. This son has picked out the wrong clothes, I must not lose face for Imperial Father. Princess He winked at the emperor. The emperor laughed heartily. Her gaze swept across the male side of the banquet, and when she saw Xiao Xiao, her heart jumped. However, the falling flowers yearn for love, but the heartless brook does not. Xiao Xiao did not even glance at her. A trace of disappointment flashed in Princess He's eyes. Dong Yinger touched Jiang Ruan's arm. "Wan Mimi, you said that Princess He likes Xiao Wangye. Is this true?" Dong Yinger had always been extremely fond of hearing such gossip. Now that there was a ready-made material, she naturally would not let it go. Jiang Yuan smiled slightly. In her previous life, the matter of Princess He being infatuated with Xiao Xiao was no longer a secret. Almost everyone in the Great Jin dynasty knew about it. Princess He had also vowed that she would not marry anyone but Xiao Xiao. She had even wanted Xu Fei to persuade the emperor to grant a marriage. However, between Princess He and Xiao Xiao, the emperor had unexpectedly chosen Xiao Xiao. He had first asked for Xiao Xiao's opinion. Xiao Xiao was a cold person, so he naturally refused. After hearing the news of Xiao Xiao's rejection, Princess He sought death every day. She had even personally gone to Jinying Wangfu to seek an explanation, but the other party remained stubborn and unmoved. In her previous life, until the end, Princess He and Xiao Xiao did not end up together. Jiang Ruan's eyes drooped. Princess He's experience made people sigh, but that did not include her. This was because in her previous life, Princess He had often tripped her up when she was in the palace. Princess He was a narrow-minded person, and by nature, she was jealous. When Jiang Wan first entered the palace, she was the most beautiful among the batch of beauties. She was incomparably charming, but Princess He was gorgeous. She did not want anyone to steal her limelight. She often found people to cause trouble for her. There was even one time when she slandered the maidservants in her courtyard for stealing, and all the second-rank palace maids in her courtyard were killed. That scene had appeared in Jiang Ruan's dreams countless times, and every time it happened, she was extremely frightened. Among her old friends in the palace, none of them were kind to others. However, at this moment, the Empress Dowager suddenly said, "Deputy General Jiang, you said today that tomorrow is your younger sister's birthday?" Empress Dowager Ida had not avoided the conversation with the men. She had a good relationship with the emperor, so there was no need to guard against anything. Now that she had brought it up, it was thought-provoking. Jiang Ruan was slightly startled. She had forgotten her own birthday. In her previous life, after entering the palace, except for Xianli who would come to see her on her birthday, there was no news of the others. However, that warmth was also fake. Now, after another lifetime, Jiang Xing had actually mentioned her birthday in front of the emperor. This made her not know what to feel. Replying to the Empress Dowager, "It is." Jiang Xing stepped out of the ranks. Where is the eldest daughter of the Jiang family? Empress Dowager Ida, after all, was someone who had experienced the War of the Chaotic Princes, so her tone was slightly dignified. Jiang Wan stood out and softly said, "Subject Jiang Wan kowtows in salute to the Empress Dowager." Her movements were formal and humble, even containing an inexplicable piety. The salute was clearly the salute that an ordinary official's family would give to the Empress Dowager, but for some reason, there was an inexplicable emotion in it. It was incomparably solemn, not like a greeting gift, but like a farewell. Empress Dowager Ida looked at her quietly, looking at the white neck, the rose swaying back and forth, the peach-colored clothes gorgeous and lively. Such a delicate and moving young girl, from head to toe, actually emitted a calm aura. Very much like that person. Her eyes actually became somewhat absent-minded. The emperor saw that the Empress Dowager was lost in thought and coughed lightly. Empress Dowager Ida seemed to recover. He looked at Jiang Ruan and said, "You may rise." "Thank you, Empress Dowager." Jiang Ruan stood up. She tried her best to ignore the pressure from the emperor and only looked at Empress Dowager Ida with a faint smile. She was born to be extremely beautiful, and she deliberately maintained a gentle smile on her lips. Unexpectedly, she had more of a princess's temperament than a princess. The eyes of the people around were red. Empress Dowager Ida's hands were iron-blooded, and she usually did not get close to people. How did Jiang Wan gain her favor? Everyone was puzzled after much thought. Jiang Xing looked at Jiang Wan nervously. Although he had mentioned Jiang Wan, he did not expect Empress Dowager Ida to suddenly speak. How could the thoughts of the imperial family be so easy to guess? He could not help but feel nervous. Below the stage, Jiang Su and Xia Yan's expressions were somewhat unsightly. Today, first it was Imperial Consort Chen, then it was Empress Dowager Ida. Jiang Ruan's limelight had really been blown away. At the same time, they had a doubt in their hearts. Forget about Imperial Consort Chen, but Empress Dowager Ida regarded Jiang Yuan so highly. Could it be that she had really taken a fancy to Jiang Yuan as a prince consort? Which prince was it, the 8th prince or the 5th prince? Or the 4th prince? Eldest daughter of the Jiang family, Aijia promises Deputy General Jiang to fulfill your birthday wish. If you have any wishes for tomorrow, you can say them today and Aijia will fulfill them. Empress Dowager Ida said. Jiang Xing had mentioned it to the emperor before, or perhaps he had used his meritorious service in exchange for Jiang Ruan's birthday wish. What protection did Jiang Yuan want? She could say it now. Xia Yan and Jiang Su breathed a sigh of relief. It was fine as long as she was not interested in becoming a prince consort. If Jiang Yuan really became a prince consort, she would certainly not have a good attitude towards the Jiang Fu. However, the smile on Imperial Consort Chen's lips was somewhat strange. If Jiang Yuan took advantage of the situation and asked which family's son she wanted to marry, Jiang Yuan smiled slightly, and her tone was somewhat desolate. Empress Dowager, please have mercy. Yuan Yang has no request. I only wish to go with Nyangqin to Ningshui Valley to see the newly bloomed peach blossoms. However, this wish is impossible to fulfill. She smiled sadly. Empress Dowager Ida suddenly raised her head. Chapter 100. Everyone did not know why Jiang Yuan would say such a great opportunity. Xia Yan sneered in her heart, thinking that Jiang Yuan was just putting on an act to gain the Empress Dowager's sympathy. Even so, there was no lack of wives of officials, and women were always soft-hearted in this aspect. Thinking that Jiang Yuan had lost her mother when she was young, and now that her birthday was just around the corner, she could not even satisfy such an ordinary wish as looking at the peach blossoms with her mother. Jiang Xing did not expect Jiang Yuan to say this, and sighed in his heart. As an elder brother, even if he wanted to make it up to Jiang Yuan in every way and let her live a carefree life, his mother would always be an irreplaceable existence. No matter how steady his sister usually looked, she was just an ordinary little girl who wanted to seek maternal love. On the Zhao family's side, Zhao Guang, Zhao Yuanjia, Zhao Yuanfeng and Zhao Yi all sighed in unison. Madame Li, who had long shed tears, said in a low voice, "Why did Mei-er leave so early? It must have been hard for Yuan-er to miss her so much. How sad must it be to not have a biological mother by his side." Zhao Yulong and Zhao Feizhou also sighed, but only Zhao Yuanping's gaze was deep. He would not assume that Jiang Yuan was simply reminiscing just because she had said so. In fact, in Zhao Yuanping's eyes, Jiang Yuan was a person with a clear purpose. She did everything with a purpose, and she had a wonderful foresight for her purpose. It was really inconceivable to say so. But every seemingly ordinary action that Jiang Yuan did now, in the end, could become an indispensable part of her goal. Moreover, in Zhao Yuanping's heart, Jiang Yuan was not a person who acted on emotions. There must be some meaning behind her words. But, what exactly was it? When the Xia family saw this, they were all dismissive. Xia Jiao, in particular, cursed Jiang Yuan in her heart, thinking that she was just a foxy woman who wanted to put on a lovely and moving appearance. The Xia family did not like it, but there were many men present who had tender and protective feelings for the fairer sex. Seeing the beauty dejected, they only wanted to protect her in the palm of their hands. Especially Gu Yi, whose heart was almost melted by Jiang Ruan's frown. When Guan Lianghan saw this, he asked Xiao Xiao curiously, "What's the matter with that Gu boy? From the looks of it, you've also taken a fancy to that girl from the Jiang family?" Mo Tsong clicked his tongue in wonder. One family has a daughter, and 100 families seek her. Now that Deputy General Jiang is in power, the originally unremarkable eldest Jiang Miss has also risen along with him. It's a good thing, a good thing. As he said this, he casually said to Lu Min, who was sitting beside him, "Lord Lu, don't you agree?" Lu Min casually responded with a few words, somewhat absent-minded. Ever since the emperor appointed him as the Zhuangyuan, he trusted him very much. Almost without any effort, he became a third-rank official. If one were to say that Jiang Xing was the fastest promoted young general in the Great Jin dynasty, then he was the fastest promoted young civil official in the Great Jin dynasty. This was originally a good thing, but the more he entered the imperial court, the more he felt that life was difficult. Many people tried to trip him up in the dark. Some were jealous, and some pretended to flatter him. Every day, he had to wear a fake mask to deal with people. This was not the career that Lu Min wanted. Every time this happened, he would think of the stranger who had exchanged letters with him in the imperial college. That person had also talked to him about the way of being an official. At first, he had only felt that the other person was too slick and not upright enough. Now, he felt that it was a kind of cleverness that looked at all things. However, that person never appeared again. Xiao Xiao carefully observed Jiang Ruan's every move. He also noticed the Empress Dowager's absent-mindedness. There was a trace of doubt in his heart, but he did not show it on his face. He sat alone and leisurely sipped his tea, attracting the infatuated gazes of the crowd of women. The Empress Dowager finally recovered and said, "What is this wish? Aijia wants to hear your reason." Of all the things in the world, nothing is better than the happiness of family by one's side. Jiang Wan smiled and said, "However, this subject's daughter and mother have long been separated forever. In this life, there will never be such an opportunity to look at the newly bloomed peach blossoms in Ningshui Valley. Wan Yang only hates that when mother was still alive, we did not look at the peach blossoms a few more times, leaving behind a lifetime of regret that is impossible to make up for." With every sentence she said, Empress Dowager Ida sat up a little straighter. Although the expression on her face did not reveal anything, Jiang Wan knew that Empress Dowager Ida had heard her words deeply. That's right, everyone knew that Empress Dowager Ida was cold and ruthless. She could even use her own son and daughter. As long as it was for the world, she could give up everything. At that time, Princess Yuan Rong was in the prime of her life and already had a sweetheart. She was unwilling to marry into a foreign country, but she was locked in the palace by Empress Dowager Ida. Princess Yuan Rong begged bitterly, but Empress Dowager Ida did not soften her heart. In the end, Princess Yuan Rong had no choice but to marry into a foreign country. However, not even 3 years later, she died in a foreign country because she was too worried. Empress Dowager Ida did not even allow Princess Yuan Rong's body to be transported over. Thus, Princess Yuan Rong could only sleep in a foreign country forever. Those who knew of this matter all thought that Empress Dowager Ida was too ruthless. Even her own daughter was so vicious. But in fact, in her previous life, Jiang Wan had learned from Xianli that Empress Dowager Ida was not a cold-hearted person. In fact, she valued her 3 children very much. At that time, the death of the first prince was an accident. Princess Yuan Rong's marriage was also an act of helplessness. On the day of Princess Yuan Rong's marriage, Empress Dowager Ida cried for a whole month in the Palace of Compassionate and Peaceful. When the news of Princess Yuan Rong's death came, Empress Dowager Ida even wanted to go with her. If it were not for the fact that the emperor's throne was still unstable and needed support, Empress Dowager Ida would not have allowed herself to live. The person Empress Dowager Ida loved the most in her life, and the person she felt the most guilty about, was Princess Yuan Rong. Xianli had once found someone to carefully investigate the events of that year. Because Empress Dowager Ida was too concerned about the emperor's throne, Xianli found a woman who looked like Princess Yuan Rong and entered the palace to study with her. Xianli had also specially instructed that woman. Not long after that woman entered the palace, she was accidentally seen by Empress Dowager Ida. She was summoned to the Palace of Compassionate and Peaceful. After a few days, that woman became a Junju. Not long after, Empress Dowager Ida suddenly died. In her previous life, Xian Li's explanation to Jiang Yuan was that his biological grandmother missed Xiaogu all day and was overly worried. Thus, she had specially found someone who looked like Princess Yuanrong to make her happy. At that time, Jiang Yuan had thought that Xian Li was being filial. Now that she thought about it, Empress Dowager Yi De's sudden death could not be separated from that woman who had been conferred the title of Junju. No matter what, now that time had turned back, and she was fortunate enough to arrive before that woman entered the palace. Even Xian Li had not thought of investigating Empress Dowager Yi De's past. If she could not gain Empress Dowager Yi De's trust, it would be too unjustifiable. Empress Dowager Yi De looked at Jiang Yuan quietly, her gaze unexpectedly gentle. Everyone thought that the cold and hard Empress Dowager had been moved by the tragic life experience of the eldest Jiang Miss, but no one knew the excitement and surprise in her heart at this moment. This was because whether it was Jiang Ruan's dressing, smile, or words, they were exactly the same as Princess Yuanrong. When the late emperor passed away, her position as Empress Dowager was unstable. The first prince, who was still the crown prince, was plotted against and killed, and the second prince was appointed as the new emperor. In desperation, she could only think of using Princess Yuanrong for a peaceful marriage. Princess Yuanrong stayed in the depths of the palace all year round, and people did not have many opportunities to see her. At that time, Princess Yuanrong also liked to dress in peach pink. She was obviously a young lady of marriageable age, but she still liked to wear her hair in a single spiral bun, with a rose hairpin in her hair. With one look, one could tell that she was the pampered daughter of some family. Princess Yuanrong had an excellent temperament. Although she was kind and pure, she was also excessively sensible. When she found out about the peaceful marriage, although she was unwilling, she did not stubbornly refuse to comply like the rumors said. She still remembered that day when Princess Yuanrong boarded the bridal sedan. She gave her a long bow and said goodbye with a smile. This time, the mountains are high and the rivers are long. I don't know if I will be able to return to the land of the great Jin dynasty in the future, and look at the peach blossoms in Ningshui Valley with Empress Mother. She slowly said, "Take care." Every time Empress Dowager Yi De thought of Princess Yuanrong's farewell bow, she felt an incomparable pain in her heart. The consequences were just as Princess Yuanrong had said. The mountains were high and the rivers were long, and they, mother and daughter, would be forever separated. They would never be able to look at the newly bloomed peach blossoms in Ningshui Valley together again. Now, Jiang Yuan was dressed exactly like Princess Yuanrong. When she gave her long bow, there was a sense of familiarity. The words she said made Empress Dowager Yi De feel as if she was seeing Princess Yuanrong's voice and smile after dozens of years. She abruptly closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Almost all the people who knew about what had happened in the past were no longer in the court. The words that Princess Yuanrong had whispered to her could not be known by a second person. Jiang Yuan was still young, so naturally, no one had deliberately made her say it. The more she looked at Jiang Yuan, the more she felt that she resembled that person. In this world, was there reincarnation? If there was, could Jiang Yuan be the return of Princess Yuanrong? Empress Dowager Yi De did not know that Jiang Yuan was indeed a reincarnated person, but she was not the kind and sensible Princess Yuanrong who had sacrificed herself for the sake of the overall situation. She was the reincarnation of the cowardly and ignorant Jiang Yuan, who had been deceived to the point of being covered in blood and tears. She had been reincarnated into the Jiang Yuan who talked cheerfully and wittily, but secretly killed people like scything flax. The reincarnation of the world had its own cause and effect. In this life, the words that Xian Li had said to her had become the best tool for her to deal with Xian Li. The longer Empress Dowager Yi De remained silent, the more her heart ached for Jiang Yuan, the pitiful miss of the minister's fu. When Princess He Yi saw Empress Dowager Yi De acting like this, a trace of displeasure flashed in her eyes, and her gaze towards Jiang Yuan became somewhat sinister. Jiang Su's complexion was pale. She was born with fair skin, and this made her look even more like a piece of snow-white paper. Her usually elegant and refined facial features were now dull and tasteless, as if she was suffering from an illness. When Imperial Consort Chen saw that Jiang Yuan did not take advantage of the situation to make any other requests, the smile on her face became even more gentle, and it even contained a faint sympathy and comfort. It was like a young girl passing by a lake in Jiangnan, inadvertently seeing an injured rabbit, and holding it in her palms with an incomparable heartache. She said, "Poor child, this person has already passed away. You should look more at the future." The future? Naturally, it would look at the future. Jiang Yuan slightly lowered her head. In the future, she would watch as these people were destroyed bit by bit, becoming sacrifices for her revenge. "Many thanks to your Imperial Highness for being considerate," Jiang Yuan said. Ben Gong suddenly thought of something. Imperial Consort Chen smiled and looked at the Emperor. "Your Majesty, previously, this concubine thought that this eldest miss of the Jiang family was a good person. She knew when to advance and when to retreat, and was also very courteous. Now that I have heard her say this, my heart is also distressed. This concubine would like to trouble your Majesty to grant this concubine a wish." "What is my beloved concubine's wish?" The Emperor was in a high position and did not have too much soft-heartedness. His memory of Princess Yuan Rong was already very faint, and Jiang Yuan was no different to him. At this moment, hearing Imperial Consort Chen's question, he took the opportunity to ask. Imperial Consort Chen smiled and looked at Jiang Yuan. "Such an obedient child, this concubine does not know if this concubine will have the good fortune to let her be this concubine's daughter-in-law." Silence. The entire audience was silent. When Jiang Su heard Imperial Consort Chen's words, her complexion became deathly white, and even her lips were pale. Her whole body swayed, and she seemed to be on the verge of collapsing. Fortunately, Xia Yan was calmly supporting her from the side, otherwise, there would have been an accident. The faces of the Zhao family also froze. What did Imperial Consort Chen mean by this? "Beloved concubine" means? The Emperor asked. Little Eight's current age is also at the age of marriage, but this eldest Jiang Miss is still young. She can be engaged first, and when she reaches the marriageable age, she can enter Little Eight's fu and become the mistress of the household, Little Eight's legal concubine. If it had been silent just now, at this moment, only the sound of people sucking in a breath of cold air could be heard. It was actually the legal concubine. Although Jiang Quan's status was not low, if Jiang Yuan were to become the 8th prince's concubine, it would still be somewhat of a social climber. If she were to become a side concubine, then it would be more appropriate. From Imperial Consort Chen's words just now, everyone had thought that she wanted Jiang Yuan to become a side concubine. Who would have guessed that the moment she arrived, she wanted Jiang Yuan to become the legal concubine? Now, anyone with the slightest bit of insight would know that the 8th prince might be the future heir apparent, the future emperor of the great Jin dynasty. Wouldn't Jiang Yuan become the empress? This was a matter of small capital and huge profits. Jiang Quan's expression was complicated. He had always wanted to rope in his relationship with Xianli. In order to maintain a more stable relationship, it would be best if he could marry a daughter over. Now that Imperial Consort Chen's words had exposed the secret desire in his heart, he naturally couldn't ask for more. But how could that person be Jiang Yuan? Why not Jiang Su? Jiang Xing fiercely clenched his fists. He hadn't expected that his good intentions would actually turn into the current situation. Although he wasn't optimistic about Xiao Xiao, he didn't like Xianli even more. No matter what, Xianli was a member of the imperial family. What was the imperial family? They had groups of wives and concubines, and the intrigues and schemes in the inner courtyard were even more dangerous than in the imperial court. How could he let Jiang Yuan go to such a place? Why did Imperial Consort Chen want to drag Jiang Yuan down? Wouldn't it be better if it was Jiang Su? Jiang Quan was happy. This was the best of both worlds. Why did it have to be Jiang Yuan? Jiang Xing made a decision in his heart. If the emperor agreed, even if he had to fight against the imperial edict with all his meritorious services, he would exchange it for Jiang Ruan's freedom. When Xiao Xiao heard Imperial Consort Chen's request, he frowned. His beautiful eyes glowed with a cold luster, like a fine black gem. However, his long eyelashes drooped down to hide the emotions in his eyes. Only his temperament became even colder. He raised his eyes and glanced at Jiang Ruan. Jiang Ruan's head was slightly lowered, and her expression could not be clearly seen. Xiao Xiao's heart was moved. No matter what, Jiang Ruan was only an 11-year-old girl. She hated Xianli so much. Although he didn't know why, she would definitely not be willing to marry Xianli. Imperial Consort Chen was favored by the emperor. If the emperor agreed, Jiang Ruan would definitely not be able to resist the imperial edict. His heroic brows knitted tightly. In fact, it wasn't that he was completely helpless. If he went up to the emperor at this moment and asked to marry Jiang Ruan, he could avoid the fate of Jiang Ruan marrying Xianli. However, Jiang Ruan might not necessarily want to marry him. Xiao Xiao had taken over the embroidered uniform guard. He had traveled outside all year round, and had also been infected with some of the habits of Jianghu. However, he also understood the rules of the aristocratic disciples in the capital. He understood what marriage meant to a woman. With his temperament, he would never marry in this lifetime. Jiang Ruan was his benefactor who had saved his life. Even if this benefactor was only 11 years old, if she was in danger, Xiao Xiao would definitely abide by his original vow and lend a helping hand. However, was Jiang Ruan really willing to change from the 8th Princess Fu to the Jinying Wang Fu? Empress Shu suddenly burst into laughter. How can Jie be randomly matchmaking? Not to mention whether or not 8th Highness knows about this matter, the eldest Jiang Miss in front of you is also Minister Jiang's most beloved daughter. Jie, why don't you ask if eldest Jiang Miss is willing to marry 8th Highness? This tit for tat, Imperial Consort Chen did not even frown. She turned to look at Jiang Ruan, her tone becoming increasingly gentle and amiable. Ben Gong has forgotten. Miss Jiang, do you fancy my Xiao Ba? This question was cordial and witty, as if it was a banter from an ordinary family. However, Jiang Ruan silently sneered in her heart. Imperial Consort Chen's question was really good. What could she say? If she said no, it would mean that she looked down on Xianli. Not to mention in front of so many people, even the emperor would be the first to not forgive her. However, if she said she liked him, wouldn't that be jumping into a pit of fire? Everyone held their breath, waiting to hear Jiang Ruan's answer. The womenfolk were naturally indignant. The men, like Gu Yi and Jiang Xing, wished that they could rush up and immediately take Jiang Ruan away from this troublesome place. Dong Ying'er and Zhao Jin secretly broke into a cold sweat for Jiang Ruan. To them, they naturally knew that Jiang Ruan had never intended to marry into the imperial family. Zhao Guang was greatly shaken. The granddaughter he had just recognized was so quickly involved in this struggle for the throne. For the first time, Zhao Guang felt his own incompetence. He did not dare to block the entire General Fu to help Jiang Ruan resist the imperial edict, even if his heart was bleeding at this moment. Li Shi, who had followed her daughter-in-law to the female side of the banquet, almost twisted the handkerchief in her hand into pieces. Jiang Ruan seemed to be in a very difficult position. She did not immediately answer this. She lowered her head even more, but in her heart, she was calmly counting. Imperial Consort Chen's smile deepened, unexpectedly, such a shy child. Your Majesty, this concubine sees that this is an excellent marriage. I wonder if your Majesty is willing to be the matchmaker. Help little 8 find a suitable person. The emperor's expression was relaxed, and he did not seem to want to obstruct her. Xiao Xiao's expression was cold and cheerless. He thought for a moment, and with one hand on his teacup, he was about to stand up and ask the emperor to marry him. Unexpectedly, just as he was about to stand up, he heard a cold and hard voice say, Jia is not willing. Jiang Ruan counted to 3 in her heart. Hearing this, her lips curled into a smile, and she slowly raised her head. Following that person's words, she firmly said, replying to Imperial Consort Chen, Wan Yang is not willing. Chapter 101. Surprisingly, the first person to reject was Empress Dowager Ida. Xianli, who had been acting as if he had nothing to do with it, was stunned. The gentle smile on his face froze for a moment. Everyone else was puzzled, but Jiang Xing secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Since Empress Dowager Ida had spoken, even the emperor would not easily refute it. No matter how much Imperial Consort Chen was favored, the emperor would never go against Empress Dowager Ida's wishes for her. Imperial Consort Chen's life in the palace had always been smooth sailing. She didn't have any conflicts of interest with Empress Dowager Ida. In addition, she had an excellent reputation in the palace, so everyone liked her. Other than the Empress Dowager Ida was not close to these concubines, so they had been living in harmony. Who would have thought that today, in front of all the civil and military officials and their families, this most distinguished woman of the great Jin dynasty would mercilessly refute her suggestion? If it had been Empress Dowager Ida, then it would have been fine. But Jiang Wan had actually refused as well. What was wrong with her? The corners of Imperial Consort Chen's lips curled into a smile as she re-examined Jiang Wan. Initially, she had observed that Jiang Wan was able to advance and retreat appropriately. Her mannerisms did not seem to be those of an unfavored young miss of the minister's household. In addition to Xian Li's evaluation of her, she also believed that Jiang Wan was only a somewhat intelligent young girl. But now, it seemed that not only was she smart, but she was also very bold. Meeting Imperial Consort Chen's smiling gaze, Jiang Wan also smiled back. Her smile was humble and calm, as if it contained a different kind of emotion in her eyes. Imperial concubine Chen's movements became slightly sluggish. This was the first time she had encountered such a gaze in the world. That was provocation. Yet, his provocation was filled with the determination to win. Empress Dowager Ida's sudden words caused Xiao Xiao, who was about to get up, to stop. Ah, Mo Tsong said in surprise, doesn't the Empress Dowager, the senior, never care about these trivial matters? That's strange. Could it be that the eldest miss of the Jiang family is so adorable that even the Empress Dowager treats her differently? Xiao Xiao looked pensive as his pitch-black eyes locked onto Jiang Wan. Jiang Wan never did things that she was not sure of. She had long expected that Empress Dowager Ida would refute her. But, how did she know? Everyone present was puzzled, but no one had the guts to ask the question in their hearts. Jiang Ruan's gaze turned slightly cold. Naturally, she knew why. Imperial Consort Chen thought that she was absolutely safe, so in front of all the civil and military officials, she unscrupulously proposed to take her into the 8th prince's residence. However, her attire and appearance today were extremely similar to Princess Yuanrong's. If it was anything else, it would have been fine, but it just had to be marriage. In such a situation, how could Empress Dowager Ida not think of the past when Princess Yuanrong was forced to marry into another country? She had purposely dawdled like that, appearing embarrassed and unwilling. Wasn't it to remind Empress Dowager Ida, to remind her that Princess Yuanrong had sacrificed her own happiness all her life in exchange for the stability of the great Jin dynasty? How could Empress Dowager Ida remain indifferent to a forced marriage? Empress Dowager Ida would sympathize with her, but at the same time, she would loathe Imperial Consort Chen from the bottom of her heart. No matter how much Imperial Consort Chen was favored, after offending such a noble woman in the imperial palace, how could she be as successful as she was in the past? Life was so precious, and she lived every minute and every second of it within her calculations. How could she be reconciled to the marriage proposed by Imperial Consort Chen? Imperial Consort Chen did not speak, but only looked at the emperor with a pair of beautiful eyes. That pair of watery eyes seemed to be covered with the misty rain of the Jiangnan water village, aggrieved and sad. With just one look, it made one's heart ache. As expected, the emperor said, "Imperial mother, why?" "Aijia wants to reward the eldest daughter of the Jiang Fu today." The meaning of Imperial Consort Chen's words is not to reward, but to plunder. Empress Dowager Ida said indifferently. Her tone was already somewhat sharp. The eldest daughter of the Jiang family is Deputy General Jiang's treasure. How could he be willing to marry off his own younger sister so early? Jiang Xing was startled, but in his heart, he was somewhat grateful to Empress Dowager Ida. Without caring about anything else, he stood up and bowed deeply to the Empress Dowager. "Many thanks for Empress Dowager's consideration, but this general is indeed unwilling to betroth my younger sister so early." There was a sudden sigh in the hall. No matter what Empress Dowager Ida said, she was, after all, the Empress Dowager, and what she said was not important. However, Jiang Xing had just performed a meritorious deed, yet he had already refuted the emperor's most beloved imperial consort. Both brother and sister did not know what was good for them. It was simply ridiculous. Naturally, Xia Yan was extremely delighted. She couldn't wait for Jiang Xing and his sister to fiercely offend Imperial Consort Chen. It would be even better if they provoked the emperor so much that he would order them to die. On the other hand, Jiang Su's face regained some color. When she had first heard that Imperial Consort Chen had taken a liking to Jiang Ruan to be the 8th prince's wife, she had almost fainted. She could not understand why such a cultured, refined, and outstanding man would want Jiang Ruan, that sinister and cruel orphan with a face full of foxy charm, to be the imperial consort. Now that the Empress Dowager had stopped her, she slowly regained her composure. Needless to say, Jiang Li's eyes were full of jealousy. She was jealous of Jiang Ruan's luck, and hated herself for not having such an accomplished older brother. Jiang Dan, on the other hand, lowered her head and vigorously picked at her fingernails. She looked extremely nervous. Zhao Guang had just calmed down when he was startled by Jiang Xing's words. Guan Lianghan frowned and muttered, "Sister maniac." Being so protective, those who don't know would think that she's his daughter. Even the emperor's eyes flashed with a trace of displeasure. It was true that Jiang Xing had performed meritorious deeds, and he also admired this brave and resolute young man. However, this did not mean that he could tolerate Jiang Xing's disrespect towards the imperial consort. If there was no imperial power in his eyes, then even an astonishing talent could not remain in the Jin Kingdom's court. Under the many disapproving gazes, Jiang Ruan turned her head to look at Jiang Xing and smiled lightly. No matter what happened, in this life, she still had Jiang Xing by her side. He would stand by her side without any leeway. Even if he had to go against the whole world, he would not hesitate to protect her. Jiang Xing saw that Jiang Ruan could still smile, and his heart was somewhat relieved. When Imperial Consort Chen heard Empress Dowager Ida's words, she giggled. That's true, this concubine had actually forgotten about this matter. It's just that Deputy General Jiang, no matter how much you dote on Miss Jiang, there will be a day when that Miss Jiang will marry, won't there? She looked at Jiang Ruan with a smile. Her gaze was like the continuous drizzle of Jiangnan, with the slight chill of early spring, pervasive and slowly drilling into one's heart. Imperial Consort Chen said, "Miss Jiang, why are you unwilling? Ruan Yang's status is lowly, and I really feel that I am not worthy of His Highness's dragon and phoenix emblem. I am ashamed." Jiang Ruan lowered her head, and her tone was quite sincere. Xian Li's gaze moved. Jiang Ruan was clearly making up an excuse. How could Jiang Ruan be someone who felt lowly? He was also puzzled. Why did a little girl who was still wet behind the ears always have a faint hostility towards him? Xian Li believed that in everyone's hearts, he had a gentle and amiable appearance, and that countless women adored his gentle jade-like appearance. Even though Jiang Ruan was still young and did not understand the relationship between a man and a woman, where did this hostility come from? Had he ever behaved improperly in front of Jiang Ruan? Could it be because of Jiang Su? Thinking of this, he slowly relaxed. If it was only because of Jiang Su, it would be very easy to gain her trust. Imperial Consort Chen sighed softly. Child, what are you talking about? If Xiao Ba had not personally come to ask, why would I suddenly bring up this matter? Everyone was shocked. It was actually the 8th prince who had taken the initiative to bring it up. Xianli frowned and put away the gentle and refined smile on his face. He got up and walked into the hall. His brows were handsome, his bearing was refined, and he carried the unique noble and gentle temperament of the royal family. His face was solemn as he solemnly knelt down in front of the emperor, reporting to Imperial Father, "This is exactly what I was thinking." He glanced at Jiang Wan, and his expression became somewhat gentle, like the spring breeze in early spring. When I saw eldest Jiang Miss on Ling Long boat, I was overwhelmed by her brilliance and beauty. After returning to the palace, I fell in love with her for 4 years. I was afraid that eldest Jiang Miss would blame me for being impetuous, so I asked Imperial Mother to help me. Xianli said, "I am willing to take eldest Jiang Miss as my wife, to care for her, protect her, and love her for the rest of my life." He turned to Jiang Wan and slowly enunciated each word. "Miss Jiang, are you willing to be my, Xianli's, wife?" Such a handsome young man was professing his love in front of all the civil and military officials. Moreover, he was the 8th prince, who had always been clean and virtuous. Countless young ladies present loved and hated him at the same time. They loved such a handsome man with outstanding bearing and deep feelings. They hated that they were not the eldest daughter of the Jiang Fu and had such great luck. After listening to the 8th prince's words, Jiang Su was on the verge of collapsing. At first, she had been secretly delighted, but now, it had been replaced by a bone-deep hatred. She had never been as jealous of Jiang Wan as she was right now. A crazy jealousy. What right did Jiang Wan have to snatch away her status as the eldest daughter, and also to snatch away her sweetheart? Jiang Wan looked at Xianli indifferently. Since her rebirth, Xianli was like a fly that had eaten into her stomach. She always avoided him as much as she could. This was the first time she was so close to him. There was clearly not a trace of ease in his eyes, but the words he said were so moving and sincere. In a trance, time flowed back, and she returned to her previous life. The peach blossoms in Ningshui Valley were pink and passionate. She did not know what to do. Xianli stood under the peach blossoms and looked at her with a gentle and considerate smile. He said, "Wan, I really like you. I really like you." His words were so pleasant to hear. He only said that he liked her, but did not mention marriage. He said that he could not give her a status, so she believed him and was considerate of his difficulties. In her previous life, how she wished she could hear Xianli say, "Are you willing to be my wife?" In order to become his wife, in order to be worthy of a word of his love. She wronged herself by entering the murderous palace in place of Jiang Su. She was abused, humiliated, ridiculed, and ruthlessly trampled into dust. How could he turn a blind eye? When he finished using her, he announced that she was a demoness who brought calamity to the country. When he saw her fall miserably in the main hall, did he remember that day in Ningshui Valley, under the peach tree, those words, "Wan, I really like you." In this life, she finally heard those words, "Are you willing to be my wife?" But so what? She no longer cared about it. Xianli looked at Jiang Wan. He was confident that Jiang Wan had not been doted on by her father since she was a child. Her mother had died early, and she had lived in a rural residence for 5 years. For such a person, as long as someone treated her a little better, she would be deeply grateful and like them. It was very easy to move her heart. But as he looked at Jiang Wan, his smile suddenly and slowly froze. What kind of a pair of eyes were those? They were as beautiful as a clear spring in a mountain stream, but they were as desolate as black poppies that bloomed in a wasteland. The emotions surging in those eyes were intense yet calm. It was not love or affection, nor did it belong to any kind of joy. It was not love, it was hate. Xianli stared blankly. He had not seen wrongly. It was hate, a hate that seemed to be in the bones, a hate that could not wait to devour his flesh and blood and drink his blood. And within that hate, there was a kind of disgust, as if he was some rotten thing. His expression slowly froze. Why? Under such a strong emotion, complicated gaze of love and hate, Xian Li's mind was a kind of blank, as if he did not know how to face it next. Facing Jiang Ruan's gaze, his heart unexpectedly gave birth to a faint fear. Why was this? He tried his best to figure it out, but then he saw the young girl in front of him suddenly reveal a sneer at him. With a faint sneer, she said in a powerful and resonant voice, I am not willing. Jiang Ruan proudly raised her chin. Her tone was clearly humble, but her expression was like that of a high and mighty princess. I am indebted to your highness's kind intentions, but this subject's daughter's ambition does not lie here. Your highness's words have caused this subject's daughter's heart to be frightened, and I really do not dare to claim such a high position. As she finished speaking, she bent down and kowtowed to the emperor. I hope that your majesty will grant my wish. No matter how passionate Xian Li's words were, her heart was like stone, and her posture remained unmoved. The smile on Imperial Consort Chen's face deepened, and the light in her eyes fluctuated. Unexpectedly, she did not appear to be angry at all. Although the emperor was angry at Jiang Ruan's unappreciative action, he could not force Jiang Ruan to agree to Xian Li in front of all the civil and military officials. He waved his hand somewhat irritably. Since this is the case, it means that you and Lao Ba are not fated to be together. Xian Li's expression did not look good. He did not expect that today's matter, which he had a well-thought-out card up his sleeves, would be ruined by Jiang Ruan's cold and hard words. He looked at Jiang Ruan inquiringly. He really did not understand why Jiang Ruan had rejected him without even thinking. Her expression did not loosen in the slightest, so why did she reveal such hatred towards him? If it was only for Jiang Su, why did she hate him so deeply? Jiang Ruan took in Xian Li's expression and sneered silently in her heart. In this life, he still used the same method as in her previous life, hoping to buy her heart and let her work for him. How could there be such a cheap thing in this world? Did Xian Li think that just because he was willing to condescend to deceive others, others should be deeply grateful to him? Mo Tsung shook his head, and said in a rather regretful tone, this eighth prince is really infinitely romantic. Unfortunately, he met the Jiang family's poisonous Mississippi. He is destined to be ignored. Xiao Xiao looked at Jiang Ruan indifferently. Those who practiced martial arts had good eyesight. Just now, he had clearly seen the gaze that Jiang Ruan had used to look at Xian Li. There was not the slightest trace of love in it, but the hatred made people feel somewhat puzzled. How could she hate Xian Li so much? For a moment, it made people feel as if she had almost disappeared, as if she did not originally belong to this world. Suppressing the thoughts in his heart, Xiao Xiao suddenly frowned. His many years of intuition made him sensitive to the fact that something was wrong in the air. He gently pressed the dagger at his waist. During the palace banquet, officials were not allowed to carry weapons, but he was an exception. The emperor made an exception and allowed him to bring one. Xian Li and Jiang Ruan bowed and regretfully returned to their seats. Their sad appearance made the palace womenfolk feel extremely distressed. On one hand, they rejoiced that Jiang Ruan had not accepted Xian Li, but on the other hand, they secretly cursed Jiang Ruan for not knowing what was good for her, for making such a celestial being sad. Jiang Ruan and Jiang Xing smiled slightly. After this incident, the emperor's mood had also been greatly disturbed. With a wave of his hand, he said, "Begin the banquet." The palace maids serving the dishes entered in a line, each carrying a tray in their hands. Among them, the palace maid in the lead had a graceful figure, clear and elegant features, and was dressed differently from the other palace maids. Behind her were two palace maids dressed differently, each of them carrying a tray as they walked towards the emperor. One of them stood in place, while the other two began to pour wine for the Empress and Empress Dowager. The palace maid beside the Empress took out silver chopsticks and prepared to dip them in the wine. The palace maid in the lead was in the midst of pouring wine. Her hand had just lifted the wine pot when she suddenly pulled out a dagger from under the white cloth and ruthlessly thrust it towards the emperor's chest. With a ka-chi sound, a strong gust of wind mixed with something came over, causing the palace maid's dagger to deviate and miss the fatal spot. Unexpectedly, it was a golden button. On the high seat, almost at the same time, Xiao Xiao flew up and rushed towards the emperor's side. Guan Lianghan's expression froze, and he fiercely slammed the table and stood up. The surrounding matrons had never seen such a scene before, and they all shrieked in alarm. The palace maids dressed in pink were simultaneously startled, and a few of them suddenly flew up, pulling out the flexible swords hidden at their waists, and rushed straight towards the emperor's face. "Dog Emperor, hand over your life," the women shouted. They had actually mixed in with the palace maids serving the banquet. There were at least a few hundred palace maids serving the palace banquet today, and with such chaos, the palace hall was in a complete mess. The emperor was greatly shaken, and the imperial bodyguards desperately shouted, "Protect the emperor! Protect the emperor!" The emperor's side was protected impeccably, but the assassins did not limit themselves to only taking the emperor's life. They actually started a massacre in the palace hall, killing whoever they caught. The women's side of the banquet were all defenseless women and young ladies, and the assassins specifically targeted the women's side of the banquet. For a moment, only the sound of flesh and blood could be heard, and screams and shouts could be heard incessantly. Just by listening to the sounds, one could tell how desperate the situation was. Jiang Su had long been so frightened that she hid under the table, watching as a dainty young lady was chopped into 2 pieces before her eyes. She was so frightened that her face was ashen, but her temperament was much steadier than Jiang Li, who only knew how to scream. Xia Yan was also scared to death. She hugged Jiang Su in her arms and hid under the table. The two of them hid under the corpses, and at a glance, nothing could be seen. Jiang Dan was also scared to death, but she did not hide, nor did she scream like Jiang Li. In the midst of the chaos, she unexpectedly showed a trace of calmness. After thinking for a moment, as if she had made up her mind, she lifted her skirt and ran towards the men's side of the banquet. No one had expected such an unforeseen event, and the emperor had been moved extremely quickly. They had originally thought that the assassins would stop, but who knew that they would be so deranged as to kill without hesitation. When the palace hall was in chaos, it was even easier for something to happen. In the midst of the chaos, Jiang Xing could no longer see Jiang Ruan's figure. However, as the deputy general, he could not abandon a room full of women and children. He could only help the poor resist the assassins while he secretly searched for Jiang Ruan's figure. The sons of the Zhao family also joined in the battle, but who knew that these assassins also seemed to have received sophisticated training. They were not in a hurry to deal with people who had martial arts skills, and they specifically made their way towards the women and children. The imperial bodyguards and generals had to consider that they could not accidentally injure the families of the courtiers, so it was inevitable that they would show mercy. This gave these assassins an opening, and they became even more unscrupulous. Zhao Jin and Wen Fei came from a military family, so in the face of such a situation, they did not panic and showed a rare calmness. Zhao Jin said, "Fei, take the other sisters and leave first. I will go look for Wan Mimi and Ing When Fei hesitated, "Can you do it alone?" "It's all right, I will be careful." Zhao Jin settled the sisters down and picked up the flexible sword that had fallen from a slain assassin. Coincidentally, she saw Dong Yinger being forced into a corner, and the flexible sword in the assassin's hand was about to pierce Dong Yinger's chest. Anxious, Zhao Jin threw the flexible sword towards the assassin's back. She threw it with great force, and the assassin could not dodge in time. He was suddenly stabbed, and the sword in his hand slid down powerlessly. Dong Yinger had long been frightened to the point of tears. At this moment, seeing Zhao Jin was like seeing her savior, Jin, Zhao Jin hurriedly ran over to help her up. Are you all right? Dong Ying'er looked behind her, and her eyes widened in fear. Zhao Jin felt that something was wrong, and when she turned around, she saw a fierce face. Go to hell. Immediately after, a silver light flashed, and Zhao Jin closed her eyes in despair. Unexpectedly, she felt her body lighten, and heard the sound of something heavy falling to the ground. She opened her eyes in shock, and saw a young man carrying both her and Dong Ying'er in one hand. With a long sword in his hand, he danced extremely well. Zhao Jin was born in a military family, and had looked down on her elder brothers and father practicing swordsmanship. However, she had never seen anyone who danced with a sword so beautifully. His facial features were not as rough as those of her father and brother, but had the elegance and handsomeness of a scholar. However, within that handsomeness, there was also a trace of determination and courage. Dong Ying'er was also stunned, and a captivating blush suddenly appeared on her cheeks. Jiang Xing rescued the two of them and placed them in a corner. Stay here, don't move. After saying this, he did not look back and joined the battle. Dong Ying'er asked softly, who is he? Zhao Jin shook her head, I don't know. Looking at the back of that tall figure disappearing from the palace hall, she unexpectedly felt a little nervous and worried for this stranger. Not to mention the situation on this side, Jiang Wan had covered herself extremely well when she arrived at this moment. Although the emperor had moved, the empress was still here. There were many imperial bodyguards by the empress side, so there was no need to worry. When Jiang Wan turned her head, she saw a few assassins pushing Empress Dowager Ida into a corner. She did not know why, but they all seemed to want to deal with Empress Dowager Ida. Xianli had just settled Imperial Consort Qin down, and when he saw this scene, he was stunned and was about to run over. Jiang Wan raised her eyebrows, and without saying anything, when the assassin in the middle was about to stab Empress Dowager Ida's chest, she exclaimed, Empress Dowager. Her movements were faster than her voice, and she suddenly rushed over, pushing Empress Dowager Ida to the side, and straightened her body to meet the tip of the sword. She turned her head and smiled coldly at the astonished Xianli. Look, the show has just begun. Chapter 102. Jiang Wan straightened her body to meet the tip of the sword. Her actions were so decisive that even Xianli was stunned. The assassin did not expect a strange young girl to appear out of nowhere. His eyes narrowed and he did not show any mercy. The flexible sword in his hand went straight for Jiang Ruan's chest. At this critical moment, a dagger flew out from the side and knocked the flexible sword slightly off course. The sword's aura was obstructed and it did not pierce Jiang Ruan's chest. However, the sword's aura still managed to scratch Jiang Ruan's shoulder and chest. Blood immediately dyed her clothes red. Jiang Wan was pushed back by the sword energy and suddenly found that her body was light. Her body had fallen into a wide and cold embrace. The young man's breath blew into her ear, bringing with it the pleasant scent of green bamboo. Xiao Xiao protected her in his arms and conveniently snatched the flexible sword from the assassin's hand to block in front of him. He said to the shocked Empress Dowager Ida, this place is not suitable to stay for long. Empress Dowager, please leave first. Jin 1 and Jin 2 suddenly appeared in front of Xiao Xiao. Xiao Xiao handed Jiang Wan over to Jin 1 and 2 secret guards protected Jiang Wan and Empress Dowager Ida as they left. Everything that had happened just now fell into Xian Li's eyes. He originally wanted to save the Empress Dowager but was startled by Jiang Ruan's sudden rush out. Seeing that she was injured, Xiao Xiao saved her and left. His heart could not calm down for a long time. It was as if there was a voice in his heart reminding him that it was not like this. It should not have been like this. Everything that happened tonight was so strange that Xian Li could not figure out where the strange feeling in his heart came from. And what did the smile that Jiang Ruan showed him when she met the tip of the sword? It seemed to contain an infinite meaning that made one's heart palpitate, but it was impossible to fathom. Xianli was not the only one who saw all this. There was another person in the hall. It was Princess He. When the chaos happened, the guards around her were protecting her, so she was not entangled by the assassin. She wanted to search for the figure of that person in the hall, but when she looked up, she saw Xiao Xiao protecting Jiang Ruan in his arms. Immediately, her beautiful little face became somewhat distorted. What kind of person was Xiao Xiao? His temperament was extremely cold. Normally, he did not get close to people, let alone strange women. No matter what, Jiang Ruan was just a female official. There were so many injured female officials here, yet Xiao Xiao had saved Jiang Ruan. Moreover, He had clearly seen the nervousness in Xiao Xiao's eyes just now. He was truly worried about Jiang Ruan. He's small face was deathly pale, and she bit her lower lip. When the gu beside Empress Dowager Ida saw this, she was also surprised. Empress Dowager Ida's temperament had been very cold these years, but today, for this unfamiliar young girl, she repeatedly showed abnormal emotions. It was really somewhat strange. The highly respected imperial physician in the palace quickly rushed over. When he heard that it was Empress Dowager Ida's imperial decree, he was still very puzzled, but when he saw the unfamiliar young girl lying on the Empress Dowager's bed, he became even more suspicious. This young girl was very unfamiliar, and she was not related to Princess Yi, so why was Empress Dowager Ida so nervous? Could it be that she had a close relationship with Empress Dowager Ida? Although he was puzzled, the imperial physician did not say much. He only took Jiang Ruan's pulse before he got up and said, "This young lady has just lost too much blood. Although she has been wounded, fortunately, the wound is not deep. If it had been deeper, or a little more to the side, I'm afraid it would have been dangerous." Empress Dowager Ida breathed a sigh of relief, and the imperial physician said again, "I will write 2 prescriptions, feed this young lady the medicine, and bandage her wound. For the next few days, pay attention to avoid food, otherwise, it will not be conducive to the recovery of the wound." According to the imperial physician, will there be a scar in the future? Empress Dowager Ida frowned. The knife wound was from the shoulder to the chest. After all, she was an unmarried daughter. If there was a scar, it would more or less affect her marriage in the future. Jiang Ruan's skin was as white as snow, and for a scar to appear out of nowhere, it was a pity. In addition, her behavior today was similar to that of Princess Yuan Rong, so Empress Dowager Ida's question was somewhat sincere. The imperial physician wiped the sweat from his forehead, replying to Empress Dowager, "If she recuperates well, perhaps there will not be a scar." This meant that there might still be a scar. Empress Dowager Ida's eyes darkened, and her tone suddenly became sharp, "I understand. Go out and bring someone to get the medicine." Only then did the imperial physician carry his medicine box and leave the hall with the palace maids. Empress Dowager Ida looked at Jiang Ruan. Jiang Ruan was lying on the bed, her beautiful eyes slightly closed, and her lips were as pale as her skin. It seemed that she was trying her best to endure the pain, but she did not frown. Instead, she still looked at her with a smile, as if she was comforting her. Compared to her calm charm in the main hall, at this moment, she had taken off her outer clothes and appeared young and immature, with an even more delicate and pitiful style. In particular, the smile on her lips was so sensible that it made one's heart ache. Empress Dowager Ida suddenly thought of Princess Yuan Rong. Every time the precocious and sensible Princess Yuan Rong fell sick, in order to prevent her from worrying, she never frowned and only smiled at her. Empress Dowager Ida's heart softened, and her tone also softened. "Why did you block that knife for Ai Jia?" Jiang Ruan smiled shyly and said softly, "I don't know why, but when I saw Empress Dowager, I felt a sense of familiarity in my heart, as if I had seen you somewhere before. Just now, I didn't think too much about it, and I don't know what happened." She did not say anything dignified and righteous, but the words, as if I had seen you somewhere before, caused Empress Dowager Ida's expression to change again. The thought in her heart grew stronger and stronger. She slowly said, "You have performed a meritorious deed in saving the emperor. Ai Jia will not let you suffer this knife in vain." Jiang Wan smiled slightly and said, "Empress Dowager, can you send someone to inform eldest brother? If he can't find me, he will certainly be anxious." "There is no need to be anxious, Ai Jia has already sent someone to inform him." Empress Dowager Ida frowned slightly. Jiang Wan only said to inform Jiang Xing, but did not mention Jiang Quan and Xia Yan. Whenever something like this happened, an ordinary girl would seek out her father. Why was she so single-mindedly looking for Jiang Xing, and did not even mention Jiang Quan? Previously, she knew that the 2D siblings of the Jiang family had a very good relationship, but now it seemed that there was more to it than meets the eye. Just now, in the palace hall, when Jiang Ruan's marriage was discussed, Jiang Quan did not have much of a reaction. How was he like a father? Empress Dowager Ida's armor lightly scraped the edge of the bed, and the ruby emitted a blood-red luster. Jiang Ruan closed her eyes, and the corners of her lips slightly curled up. Some things did not need to be said too clearly, especially for smart people. Just give a few words of advice, and don't go too far. The rest, let Jiang Quan deal with it himself. She had long known that there would be an assassination attempt today. In her previous life, the emperor had also held a palace banquet after the flood. Halfway through the banquet, an assassin had sneaked in. It was Xianli who had saved Empress Dowager Ida's life. Xianli had blocked the sword with his own body, and had been seriously injured. At that time, the assassin had not been identified, and all the princes of the emperor were suspected by the emperor. The palace had been purged overnight, and even the crown prince, who had not been present that day because he was unwell, had been implicated. Only the 8th prince, Xianli, had escaped unscathed. After all, he had to put on a show, and being seriously injured was too much. Because of this, Xianli had gained the favor of Empress Dowager Ida, and because of this, the emperor had also trusted him. In her previous life, after entering the palace, Jiang Wan had learned of this matter from the idle chatter of the people in the palace. At that time, she had been very worried about Xianli's description of the scene. Now that she thought about it, there was no lack of doubtful points. As for blocking the sword for Empress Dowager Ida, that was nothing more than a joke. If Xianli was really a loyal and affectionate person like the rumors said, he would not have personally killed his own imperial father. Everyone thought that Xianli would not have been so ruthless towards her. In fact, Jiang Wan knew better than anyone that Xianli was a person who kept a low profile and was especially ruthless towards her. In this life, she had ruined his plan. Empress Dowager Ida must be saved, but the one who saved her might not be Xianli. Just now, Jiang Wan had staked everything on one throw. Today, she had been thinking of deliberately pretending to look like Princess Yuan Rong, and then thinking of a way to save Empress Dowager Ida's life. Since she had performed a meritorious deed in saving the emperor, the palace would certainly reward her, although she didn't know what it would be. However, it was enough to deter the 8th prince and the Xia clan from acting rashly for the time being. It was not until she entered the palace that she found out that Xianli planned to marry her. This was something she did not expect and had never happened in her previous life. Now that she had saved the Empress Dowager's feelings towards her would inevitably rise to another level. At this time, even if Imperial Consort Chen still wanted to use some method to force the Empress Dowager to relent, the Emperor's bestowal of marriage would be impossible. As long as she showed a trace of unwillingness, Empress Dowager Ida would not agree to the marriage. Because now, Empress Dowager Ida must have already regarded her as half a Princess Yuan Rong. Moreover, she had done a meritorious deed in saving the emperor. Henceforth, Imperial Consort Chen couldn't say that this was a good thing for her. However, this was not a matter of absolute profit. Thinking about the danger just now, there was still some lingering fear in her heart. Although she had cut off all means of retreat, she had not expected that the assassin's sword would be so menacing. It was no wonder that Xianli had been seriously injured in her previous life. Today, if Xiao Xiao had not used his dagger to deflect the assassin's soft sword, she would not have been as relaxed as she was now. She was not afraid of death, but she could not die before her revenge was complete. She owed him a favor. Jiang Ruan slowly closed her eyes. In short, today's situation was much better than she had expected. When Jiang Xinji and the Zhao family received the news that Jiang Ruan had been sent to the Palace of Compassionate and Peaceful for treatment, they were stunned for a moment. Empress Dowager Ida was usually condescending, and today was only the first time she had seen Jiang Ruan. Now that she had personally asked her to stay in the Palace of Compassionate and Peaceful, it showed that in her heart, Jiang Ruan was not simply the daughter of an ordinary official. Jiang Quan and Xia Yan were waiting outside. In her heart, Jiang Su could not wait to hear the news of Jiang Ruan's death, but when she heard that Empress Dowager Ida had summoned an imperial physician to treat Jiang Ruan, this honor could be seen at a glance. She could not help but clench her hands into fists, and a trace of resentment flashed in her eyes. Jiang Quan's expression was complicated. Today, Jiang Ruan had done a meritorious service in rescuing the emperor, and this credit would eventually be given to the Jiang Fu. Unfortunately, it was Jiang Ruan. In recent days, Jiang Ruan had repeatedly shone with extraordinary splendor, unexpectedly overshadowing Jiang Su's brilliance. In his heart, he did not regard Jiang Ruan as his own flesh and blood. Jiang Ruan was indeed outstanding, and the more she blocked Jiang Su's path, the more dissatisfied he became. Now that Jiang Ruan had done this, it was inevitable that she would be a head above Jiang Su. He wholeheartedly wanted to pave the way for Jiang Su, and Jiang Ruan's way of doing things was really intolerable. As he thought this, there was not the slightest trace of worry on Jiang Quan's face. There was only calmness and a trace of disgust. He only said to the young eunuch who had come to report, "This official sincerely thanks the Empress Dowager for her good intentions, but my daughter is impulsive and cannot bear this kindness. I would like to trouble eunuch to return and report to the Empress Dowager to allow this official to bring my daughter back to the Fu." When Xia Yan heard Jiang Quan's words, a trace of pride flashed in her eyes. At first, the young eunuch was also astonished. It was true that his daughter was injured. If it was an ordinary father, he would at least ask about the injury. Yet, this person had opened his mouth and wanted to bring her back. The young eunuch was also a shrewd person who had gone through many trials and tribulations in the palace. With one glance, he could tell that there was only disgust and no warmth in Jiang Quan's eyes. Thinking of Empress Dowager Ida's special treatment of eldest Jiang Miss, the young eunuch waved his horsetail whisk and said, "This Zajia does not dare to accept this. Eldest Jiang Miss is treated by an imperial physician in the palace. Even if she were to be brought back to the Jiang Fu, I'm afraid she would not be able to find such a brilliant physician. Moreover, this is the Empress Dowager's imperial decree. This Zajia is only a servant who conveys the message. If Jiang Darren has anything to say, it would be better for him to personally go to the Empress Dowager and say it." This kind of savage attitude, whether intentionally or unintentionally, was a form of suppression. Unfortunately, the servants in the palace could not be offended. In the palace, Jiang Quan had always been known as a noble and virtuous person. How could he be ridiculed like this? Immediately, his face flushed red and he could not say a word. The young eunuch looked at Xia Yan contemptuously and snorted disdainfully in his heart. He really did not know how these two people in the Jiang family had given birth to such a penetrating young miss like Jiang Ruan. Jiang Xinji could not see Jiang Ruan's injury with his own eyes. Although he knew that there was an imperial physician treating her, his heart was still anxious and fearful. He did not know why Jiang Ruan would block the sword for Empress Dowager Ida, and he somewhat blamed her in his heart. Although it was disgraceful, even if the emperor's life was hanging by a thread, he still did not want Jiang Yuan to take this risk. The young eunuch was about to leave after replying, but just as he reached the door, he bumped into Xiao Xiao. He hurriedly bowed to Xiao Xiao. Xiao Xiao waved his hand, took out a small blue porcelain bottle from his bosom, and threw it at him. He simply said, "Jade facial ointment." Jade facial ointment was a good thing that even the imperial concubines in the palace rarely had access to. This small bottle was worth 1,000 taels of gold, and it could remove scars on a woman's body. Although Xiao Xiao did not say for whom, the young eunuch understood that the target should be Jiang Yuan, who was lying in the palace of Compassionate and Peaceful. Although he was suspicious of the relationship between Xiao Xiao and Jiang Yuan, he still smiled fawningly and said, "Rest assured, Your Highness, Zejia will definitely bring it." Xiao Xiao glanced at him indifferently, turned around, and left the palace hall. That night in the palace of Compassionate and Peaceful, Jiang Yuan slept surprisingly well. When she woke up, two beautiful palace maids were busily helping her change her clothes. Jiang Yuan moved her body, and surprisingly, the wound on her chest did not hurt. One of the palace maids smiled and said, "Miss has woken up. The wound is not deep, it will be fine after a good bandage." She then explained in a low voice, "Previously, the imperial physician wanted to leave a scar. Fortunately, Xiao Wangye sent the jade facial ointment, so there is no need to worry, there will not be a scar left." There was a trace of envy in her tone. Jiang Yuan looked at her appearance and was startled. Xiao Xiao sent the jade facial ointment. She pressed the center of her forehead. The favor she owed him was getting bigger and bigger. Since her rebirth, when she used people, she would certainly give them an equivalent reward. For example, supporting Lu Min was also for the sake of being useful in the future. Asking Gu Yi for help was also to take advantage of Gu Yi's love for beauty. Could it be that the guards were all dead? He looked at Xiao Xiao. "Xiao, bring out your embroidered uniform guards." This meant that a great purge was about to be carried out. The assassins of Tianjin had entered the palace as if there was no one there. This meant that there was already a mole in the palace. Although the identity of the mole was not known, as long as the mole was not removed, it would be like a malignant tumor growing on the emperor's heart. Xiao Xiao nodded slightly, "Yes." Guan Lianghan sighed in his heart. In this palace, there was bound to be another reign of terror. After the two of them had finished discussing other matters with the emperor, they left the imperial study and saw a beautiful young girl standing outside. She was dressed in a golden muslin skirt, her clothing was gorgeous and exquisite. Her meticulously made-up face was extremely beautiful and had a faint exotic aura. She leisurely walked over and smiled at Xiao Xiao, Xiao Wangye. It was Princess He. Guan Lianghan winked at Xiao Xiao and left with large strides. Xiao Xiao looked down at He indifferently, his gaze unexpectedly without the slightest bit of warmth. Princess He's heart skipped a beat when she saw his cold gaze, and she unexpectedly felt a little timid. However, when she thought of last night's events, her gaze revealed traces of resentment. She raised her head and looked straight at Xiao Xiao's handsome and cold face. What relationship does Xiao Wangye have with eldest Jiang Miss? This question was baffling, and Xiao Xiao did not know what she meant. He frowned and coldly said, "What does this have to do with Princess?" Princess He's eyes reddened as she felt a chill run down her spine at his cold words. Aggrieved, she said, "You clearly know that I like you. Princess, be careful with your words." Xiao Xiao's gaze suddenly turned cold. "I, Xiao, have no other intentions towards Princess." "What about Jiang Yuan?" Princess He could not help but ask sharply, "Do you like her?" Xiao Xiao's frown deepened, as if he could not understand her words. However, there were more important matters at hand, so he only glanced coldly at Princess He and turned to leave. In Princess He's eyes, this action was a tacit agreement. She was startled for a moment, then suddenly covered her face and burst into tears. After Jiang Yuan had her breakfast, Empress Dowager Yi returned to the palace of compassionate and peaceful. Seeing her like this, she asked, "Is your body better?" Jiang Yuan smiled. Replying to Empress Dowager, "I am much better." Empress Dowager Yi looked her up and down and saw that her spirit was indeed much better than yesterday. Feeling relieved, she sat down on the soft couch. Next to her, her personal palace maid brought her a cup of tea. Empress Dowager Yi took the tea and took a sip, quietly sizing Jiang Yuan up. The young girl in front of her was obedient and clean. Chapter 103. Jiang Xing was taken aback. He looked towards the source of the voice and saw a beautiful and delicate young girl with two maids behind her. Judging from her attire, she should be a young lady from a wealthy family. He found it familiar, and for a moment, he was puzzled. When the girls saw that Jiang Xing didn't seem to remember her, a trace of disappointment flashed in her eyes. A moment later, he smiled and said, "My father is the capital governor, and he wants to invite you to his residence to express his gratitude." Guan Lianghan looked at him with understanding. "You must be reluctant to part with that sister of yours." "Brother and sister, what do you mean by always valuing your younger sister more than your own daughter? Besides, to be honest, that sister of yours is not someone who will easily suffer a loss. I'm afraid that others have not been schemed against by her." However, Jiang Su was not as agitated as she usually was. Her pale face was very calm. "Mother, I have already decided. I want to go to the family temple. I've already begged father, and he agreed." "How did you know?" Lian Xiao was surprised and continued, "That's right. I heard that second Yinyang said something to master and master changed his mind. Originally, he wanted to send fourth Mrs. Geng invitation, but now he decided to send third Miss instead." Jiang Xing stood rooted to the ground, his mind a mess. He naturally knew that this was an excellent opportunity. The battlefield was originally a place to display one's fists and feet. If he lost, he would just die on the battlefield, but if he won, he would gain glory and splendor. He was not afraid of death, nor did he pursue glory, splendor, wealth and rank. However, if he wanted Jiang Yuan to receive better protection, then he could only climb higher step by step. Is Suo Langzhong willing to do this? Jiang Yuan leaned against the soft cushion of the carriage seat as she sipped her tea unhurriedly. "I just can't accept it." Jiang Dan's voice was hoarse. "I worked so hard, but in exchange, I ended up like this. Jiang Li snatched my marriage, Jiang Su's father protected her, and even Jiang Yuan, whom I originally thought might not be much better off than me, is now enjoying limitless glory. What have I gained?" In a flash, her gaze turned cold, and she said in a low voice, "I am just unreconciled. One day, I will live a better life than all of them. I will make them all look up to me." With this in mind, he was determined to attack the Tianjin nation. However, when he thought that Jiang Yuan would have to live alone in the Jiangfu for 3 years, he felt his heart wrench. Empress Dowager Yi's reward could be said to be generous. Even if she was bent on revenge, she couldn't help but be tempted. 3 years was enough for many things to happen. Xia Yan might be able to regain her power, but by staying by Empress Dowager Yi's side, she could also make it so that Empress Dowager Yi could not leave her side. At this time, Jiang Xing was talking to Jiang Yuan at Ruanju. Naturally, Jiang Yuan knew that he was about to set off on an expedition to Tianjin. In his previous life, the war between the Tianjin kingdom and the Great Jin dynasty had lasted for 5 years. However, Jiang Xing was no longer around in his previous life. Now that the same thing had happened, she naturally knew that the Great Jin dynasty had won this battle, but it had been a Pyrrhic victory. The kingdom of Tianjin had produced an extremely powerful military advisor. Together with this treacherous weapon, they had almost caused the Great Jin dynasty to suffer a loss. Lian Xiao said. After returning that night, Master and Madam went to the study room. I don't know what they said, but second young miss was shocked. They found a doctor and gave her a prescription to calm her nerves before going to sleep. When second young master heard the news that eldest young master had received a reward, he was very angry and went out to drink. There was a hint of ridicule in her tone. The next day, he was carried back drunk. Jiang Wan smiled as she looked at the professional Empress Dowager Ida, but her heart was in turmoil. Bai Ji also sighed. Fourth young miss is really too pitiful. Zhuo Langzhong does not know about this matter. According to second Yin Yang, as long as she marries and goes through the ceremony, Zhuo Langzhong will be helpless. When the time comes, Master will personally talk to Zhuo Langzhong, and the matter will be settled. Jiang Xing touched her head and did not speak. Jiang Xing calmly distanced himself from Guan Lianghan. That is my family's matter, General does not need to worry about it. She motioned for Bai Ji and Lian Xiao to stay in the carriage, while she walked towards Xiao Xiao. When she was in front of Xiao Xiao, she said, Xiao Wangye. The general-in-chief who supports the state had devoted his life to the country and the people, and had not taken the initiative to make any requests. In front of all the civil and military officials, the emperor could not refuse such a simple request. Thus, he waved his hand, approved. Jiang Xing did not seem to notice that he had abandoned a woman's self-esteem. Dong Yinger murmured, does he hate me? Jiang Su's complexion had been pale for the past few days. Xian Li's words on the night of the palace banquet had pierced her heart. She was naturally unwilling that the person in the heart of such a handsome man was actually Jiang Wan. At this moment, when he heard that Jiang Wan was about to leave, he sneered, good, it's good that you leave. It's best if you die in the ancestral temple. The blood moon bracelet on Jiang Ruan's wrist emitted a faint blue light. Finished speaking, he stared fixedly at the dagger, as if he would rather die than take it back. Jiang Wan looked into the distance, soon. Jiang Wan tilted her head and saw the corner of a black robe through the gap in the curtain. She thought for a moment, then said to the coachman, let the coachman leave first. Jiang Wan raised her eyebrows and waited for her to continue. Sure enough, Lian Xiao said, after third miss found out about this, she did not say anything and went to find second Yin Yang. Second Yin Yang went to find Master. Later, Master called fourth miss into the study and talked for a while. When fourth miss came out, her face was pale. Later, Lu Zhu went to inquire about it. What do you think miss found out? What you gain, you will lose. Jiang Xing had just entered the imperial court, and his foundation was not yet stable. If he could obtain the Empress Dowager's support, are you muddle-headed? Xia Yan was shocked, why go to the family temple? Do you know that if you go to the family temple, your life will be ruined? The carriage rumbled along and suddenly stopped. Lian Xiao was startled and subconsciously lifted the curtain, what's going on? Jiang Xing had actually made up his mind, but he was still worried about Jiang Wan. Who knew that as soon as he returned to the Fu, he would hear that Empress Dowager Ida wanted to take Jiang Wan away. His heart was immediately relieved. Following Empress Dowager Ida was much safer than staying in the Jiangfu. But he was also suspicious and said, I don't know why the Empress Dowager is looking for you, but accompanying a ruler is like accompanying a tiger, the Empress Dowager is the same. Wan, you have to act according to the circumstances. Don't let yourself suffer losses. Strange things happened one after another. It was said that on the second day, the Defender General who supports the nation, Zhao Guang, personally presented a memorial to the imperial court, stating that Jiang Wan was the flesh and blood of the Zhao family. At that time, the Zhao family had ruthlessly severed all ties with Zhao Mei, and now, they did not ask for anything else. She only begged the emperor to grant her a grace, so that in the future, Jiang Ruan's marriage could be decided by herself. Let's wait and see. We'll see in a few years. Thank you, Prince Xiao. She said. The Jiang family's eldest daughter, Jiang Yuan, had used her own body to block a sword on the day of the palace banquet to save the Empress Dowager's life. This news had spread throughout the entire capital that very night. Everyone knew that Empress Dowager Ida, who had always been cold and solemn, had personally brought Jiang Yuan back to the palace of compassionate and peaceful to summon an imperial physician to treat her. Everyone said that the eldest daughter of the Jiang family had profited from misfortune. Since she had saved the Empress Dowager's life, she would become the Empress Dowager's savior in the future. There were also those who snorted disdainfully, believing that Jiang Yuan was merely using her own life to fight for a better future. When Guan Lianghan explained the emperor's plan to Jiang Xing, he saw that Jiang Xing's brows were tightly knitted together. Guan Lianghan also couldn't bear to see him so bleak, so he patted his shoulder and said, "A real man should go on the battlefield and kill the enemy. You're babbling so much, are you afraid of death?" At this time's palace banquet, he had seen it clearly. Even if Jiang Yuan was precocious, being in the Jiang Fu was really too dangerous. Jiang Quan could push Jiang Yuan out at any time. Last night, if Empress Dowager Ida had not spoken, Jiang Yuan might even have married into the 8th Prince Fu. If he had more power, he would certainly not have allowed others to so easily control Jiang Yuan's future. The two of them turned around and left, neither of them looking back. Many years later, when the Great Jin dynasty became a prosperous and beautiful painting of rivers and mountains, this scene would be talked about enthusiastically by many people. The parting at the city gates for this legendary pair of brother and sister became the starting point of their life's true glory. Since you wanted to be injured, I could only let the sword chi injure you a little. In the end, I still hurt you. I'm sorry. Jiang Xing smiled and said, "Yuan, take care." He turned around and left. Moreover, the next day, there was another earth-shattering news. Empress Dowager Ida was about to set off to the ancestral temple at the edge of the imperial mausoleum to pray for blessings. 3 years later, she would return to the palace and personally issue an imperial edict for the eldest daughter of the Jiang family to accompany her. Jiang Yuan was stunned. He had actually seen that she had taken the initiative to meet that sword. Immediately, her heart felt somewhat complicated. However, she still smiled and said, "Wan Yang is different from Xiao Wangye. Whatever Wan Yang wants, she will fight for it herself. If I had not blocked that sword, I would not have been able to obtain what I wanted." As he thought of this, his face became somewhat solemn. "It's nothing." Jiang Su seemed to not want to say more and turned her head away. "I'm just tired of life in the Fu. It's good to go to the ancestral temple, to calm my heart." "Isn't Jiang Yuan also going to the imperial ancestral temple?" "Why can't I go? Isn't it to have a good reputation? Hasn't she relied on a good reputation to get to where she is now? 3 years later, I can also do it. Eldest brother, after this farewell, I hope that in another 3 years, you and I will be fated to meet again." "Did you get what you wanted?" Xiao Xiao asked. This was even more surprising than last night's news. Su, what happened?" Xia Yan was alarmed. Jiang Su's appearance made her even more worried. "Fourth miss." Lian Xiao said mysteriously, that Zuolangzhong's people came a few times. "They seem to be good people, and they insist on being responsible for 4th Mississippi. They said that they will come to marry you in a few days, but the horses neighed, and the morning sun sprayed out, dyeing half of the sky of the Great Jin dynasty red. Clouds shone brightly in the sky, casting their light on the elite troops with high morale. The carriage rose, and a warm and gentle expression watched the procession go into the distance. Empress Dowager Ida said lightly, "Aijia knows that you are a clever child. Think carefully, and follow Aijia. Aijia will ensure your safety. After 3 years, when you return to the palace, your status will not be ordinary." She looked at the ruby on her armor. "You saved Aijia's life." After thinking about it, Aijia can only be happy with this reward. Bai Ji was puzzled, why does Miss say this? Xiao Xiao's beautiful eyes flashed with emotion. He pursed his lips, took out something from his bosom, and handed it to Jiang Ruan. Jiang Xing's gaze was reluctant to part. Jiang Ruan quietly stuffed the paper in her hand into Jiang Xing's waist. Jiang Xing was stunned. Jiang Ruan smiled and said in a low voice, one of them is for eldest brother, and the other is for great master Hui Ju in the capital. Eldest brother, take care. I am not sad. Jiang Ruan smiled slightly. Outside, it seemed that the fluttering corner of Jiang Xing's robe could still be seen. When she turned to go to the unfamiliar 3 years that had never existed in her past life, this young general would also step onto the battlefield, fight on the battlefield, and win his unique pride and dignity. 3 years was 3 years. The most painful thing in this world was not losing something before it was obtained, but to watch helplessly as it was held in one's hands, and then ruthlessly taken away. The higher one climbed, the harder they fell. She gave those people 3 years to climb to a height where they could fall to their deaths, and then after 3 years, their bodies would be smashed to pieces. Jiang Xing frowned slightly and remembered. Last night, he had indeed pulled this young girl up, but because he had saved too many people, and because of the chaos, he could not remember. Jiang Ruan laughed in her heart. Xiao Xiao was usually cold and cheerless, but how could he be so childish at this time? It really made one's jaw drop. The happiest person in the Jiang Fu was none other than the old Jiang madam. After all, Jiang Ruan's surname was Jiang, which meant that she was part of the Jiang family. No matter what other people thought, when Jiang Ruan was mentioned, they would know that she was a girl from the Jiang Fu. The emperor's care for Jiang Ruan was the emperor's care for the Jiang Fu. When she thought of this, she felt that Jiang Ruan and her sister were very amiable. Jiang Ruan nodded, yes. It is my good fortune to be able to travel with the Empress Dowager. She paused and looked at Xiao Xiao. On the day of the palace banquet, many thanks to Xiao Wangye for lending a helping hand. Jiang Ruan shook her head, wrong, Jiang Li will not be better off than Jiang Dan. What kind of person was Jiang Dan? Jiang Dan was not someone who would silently swallow grievances. If Jiang Quan thought that he could knead Jiang Dan as he pleased, then he was gravely mistaken. It could not be denied that the matter of Jiang Li had already left a shadow of hatred in Jiang Dan's heart. That kind of venomous snake, lying in wait in the dark, would not hesitate to use its venom to kill all its enemies once it had the chance, leaving no leeway for others. Jiang Ruan did not think that Jiang Dan was pitiful. Since she had schemed against Zuolangzhong last night, she must have already had a plan. However, she had never thought that everything would be for the benefit of another person. As a concubine daughter, Jiang Li was naturally unwilling to accept that Jiang Dan would marry so well. Between Jiang Li and Jiang Dan, Jiang Quan would definitely side with Jiang Li. She did not know what second Yinyang had said to Jiang Quan, but it must have been for the sake of benefits that Jiang Quan had made this decision. That was what she had written down from memory the entire night. In her previous life, when she was in the palace, she had also heard some stories about the war between Tianjin and the Great Jin dynasty. There were some particularly thrilling battles that had been described in detail by those palace people. She searched for the information in her mind and wrote down all the battles that she could remember on a piece of paper for Jiang Xing. Whether or not Jiang Xing would suspect her, she no longer wanted to think about it. She only wanted to ensure Jiang Xing's safety. Now, she only wished that she could remember it more clearly. She was annoyed that she had not listened more in her previous life, so that Jiang Xing would have a higher chance of survival. Lian Xiao also said, "Third Miss has snatched Fourth Miss's marriage. Although it is not very kind, Zuolangzhong's family is very good. In the future, they will certainly live much better than Fourth Mississippi. Although Fourth Miss has received Master's consolation, I am afraid that she does not feel good in her heart." On the day that the Empress Dowager left the capital, there were 36 soft sedan chairs, 900 elite soldiers and guards, and 85 silk and jadeite carriages. The entire journey was grandiose and imposing. The emperor stood at the top of the palace walls and watched the procession go into the distance. After he finished speaking, he did not wait for Dong Yinger's reply and hurriedly rode away. When the young girl saw that Jiang Xing was staring at her, her cheeks suddenly turned bright red. She hesitated for a moment before taking 2 steps forward and saying, "Last night, Darren saved my life. My daughter would like to personally thank Darren." Jiang Ruan's reputation soared. "It's nothing, just a small injury." Jiang Ruan waved her hand. "How is the Fu now?" Dong Yinger watched as the figure on the horse gradually disappeared, and a trace of disappointment and frustration flashed in her eyes. Jiang Wan smiled slightly. "Third sister wants to substitute a peach for a dead one." Whenever Jiang Wan was mentioned, Jiang Xing became especially prickly. Guan Lianghan also became angry and said, "Then you should be troubled by yourself. Once the emperor's imperial edict is issued, you have to go even if you don't want to, unless you want to defy the edict. However, even if it is for your younger sister, you will not defy the edict." Dong Yinger was startled at first. The words, "Wan Mimi and I are also good friends," were still stuck in her throat. Since she was 14 years old, this was the first time she had been so subdued by a man's elegant demeanor. Last night was so chaotic, but in the arms of this good-looking young general, she felt at ease for the first time. When she heard that he was Jiang Ruan's older brother, Dong Yinger was indescribably happy. She had even sneaked out today, and when she found out that he was in the Guanfu, she had deliberately waited at the door just to see him. She looked at the person in front of her. He was dressed in black and embroidered, and had a noble temperament. His handsome face was cold and elegant, and he had an aura of abstinence. However, his eyes were pitch black and deep, as bright as the night sky. At this moment, as he stared at her seriously, there was a trace of stubbornness. Sure enough, as soon as she alighted from the carriage, she saw the back of the black figure in front of her, cold and elegant. The dark alley seemed to glow because of him. Jiang Wan was startled. She understood what Empress Dowager Ida meant. Empress Dowager Ida had given her an opportunity, an excellent opportunity. Admittedly, she was extremely unwilling to leave the Jiangfu and give Xia Yan and the others another 3 years. However, if she could follow Empress Dowager Ida to the Imperial Ancestral Temple, her status would naturally be different. Lu Zhu lifted the curtain of the carriage and looked outside, saying, "What an imposing manner. It's just that Miss has just arrived in the capital and is about to leave. I think it is somewhat sad." Xia Yan still wanted to persuade her, but Jiang Su already said, "Mother, there is no need to say more. I have already made up my mind. I will depart in a few days." The maidservant cried as she said, "Miss should at least eat something. If you continue like this, your body will collapse." Empress Dowager Ida's words actually meant that she should leave. "The ancestral temple is not completely safe," Xiao Xiao said indifferently. "It can help you." He said, "I want to make another trip to the Miao Stockade village. On the day of my departure, I will not be able to say goodbye to you." Whenever Xia Yan thought of Jiang Wan following Empress Dowager Ida to the ancestral temple, her heart felt like it was being twisted by a knife. Why did such a thing fall on that little slut, Jiang Ruan? Xiao Xiao's gaze fell on Jiang Ruan's wrist, and he suddenly said, "It suits you very well." Jiang Xing angrily said, "I am not greedy for life and afraid of death, it's just that." He swallowed the rest of his words. She said, "Thank you, eldest brother." Jiang Li was afraid that there would be a lot of grinding. However, no matter what was said, it was an indisputable fact that Jiang Wan had gained the favor of Empress Dowager Ida. They happened to arrive at a small alley, and there were no signs of people around. Bai Ji was a little worried, but Jiang Wan had already jumped off the carriage. Chapter 104. Xiao Xiao's words from 3 years ago would forever be a thorn in Princess Heyi's heart. She originally wanted to find a way to harm Jiang Ruan, or at least make her wish she was dead. Who knew that with the Empress Dowager's edict, Jiang Ruan would withdraw and follow her to the Imperial Ancestral Temple, allowing her to escape. 10 days ago, when she heard that Jiang Ruan was returning to the capital, she was startled and thought of all the ways she could think of to harm her. Who knew that when she saw Jiang Ruan's appearance today, her heart would be in turmoil? I was just reminding fifth brother. Princess Heyi smiled slightly. My imperial mother and imperial consort Nyang Nyang do not get along, so naturally, I would not sincerely want to help her. That would be my last resort. Isn't that why I'm looking for fifth brother? Fifth brother, you have to think clearly. That Hong and princess is a wonderful person. Fifth brother, you won't lose out. Jiang Chao was now working under Xian Li, managing the affairs of the shops in the capital. This task could not be considered big, but it was definitely not small either. In the past few years, Jiang Chao had worked hard and done a good job, earning Xian Li's appreciation. Jiang Quan, who was previously disappointed with Jiang Chao, had gradually changed his opinion of this son. Fifth Prince Xianhua's handsome face was gloomy. 10th sister, do you think that fifth brother is someone you can use? She was dressed in a bright red palace robe with flowing colors and dark flowers. She wore a cloud satin skirt with crabapple strands and golden butterflies. On the outside, she wore a light crimson lawn robe embroidered with wide sleeves of auspicious grass and wild geese. Her hair was combed into a hibiscus cloud bun, and her jet black hair was coiled behind her head, making her skin appear even whiter than snow. However, that ball of fiery red seemed to have splashed down from the heavens, landing on the rosy clouds of the great Jin dynasty. Her eyebrows were like spring water, her eyes like peach blossoms, and her lips were rosy like cherry blossoms. Her eyebrows and eyes were actually the depictions of beautiful women that had been painted for thousands of years. There was no air of immortality, but if one was not careful, they would fall into the graceful charm of this land. 8th Prince Xianli stared closely at the beautiful young woman approaching from afar. If 3 years ago, he had only wanted to control and use Jiang Ruan, now, besides being stunned, he was even more determined to win her. There were many beautiful women in this world, but there weren't many intelligent and beautiful women. However, someone as intelligent and beautiful as her was one of a kind in this world. Xian Li's heart was slightly moved. This woman was worthy enough to stand by his side. In the future, when he was the king, she would definitely be the empress. Are you threatening me? Xianhua was enraged. After Jiang Quan left, the smile on Xia Yan's face immediately disappeared. She had originally thought that being pregnant was a good thing, but in the end, it had given Hong Ying, that fox, an opportunity to take advantage of her. It had been a long time since Jiang Quan had entered her courtyard. Everything was left to Hong Ying to handle. Now, she couldn't even shove Lin Lang over. In this way, some people were secretly delighted, while others were disappointed. Empress Dowager Ida returned to the capital. Elite soldiers stood in front of the palace gate and 100 miles of ceremonial guards were stationed. The emperor led the civil and military officials to welcome her. A long procession came from afar. Under the sunlight, the palace was extraordinarily gorgeous, and the purple-patterned carriage was inlaid with golden threads, shining brightly under the sun. The procession started, the civil officials on the left, the military officials on the right, they all bowed down, welcome Empress Dowager back to the capital. No one could forget that 3 years ago, the eldest daughter of the Jiang family had blocked a sword with her own body and saved Empress Dowager Ida's life. Empress Dowager Ida had specially rewarded her by taking her to the ancestral temple to accompany her. Not long ago, the emperor officially conferred her the title of Hong and Commandery Princess. Everyone knew that Empress Dowager Ida treated this Hong and Commandery Princess differently. Now that they had seen it with their own eyes, this Hong and Commandery Princess was actually so beautiful that it could topple cities. She was definitely the most beautiful woman in the world. Riches come from danger, Commandery Princess Hee smiled slightly. It is all right if fifth brother is afraid. I heard that eighth brother and the Jiang Fu's in-laws, the Xia Fu, have always been on good terms. Presumably, his relationship with the Jiang Fu is not that bad. Just now, younger sister saw clearly the way eighth brother looked at Hong and Commandery Princess. TSK, I think that since Hong and Commandery Princess is already of marriageable age, it won't be long before eighth brother comes to propose marriage. When that time comes, the Zhao family army and the Guan family army will all belong to eighth brother. Lian Qiao, who was serving by her side, was stunned. Her family's miss had always been beautiful. These few years, she had grown up a little and was becoming more and more beautiful. Even the servant girls who served her in close proximity would sometimes be dazed by her beauty. She did not know what kind of commotion it would cause in the capital. Thinking of this, she felt a little uneasy. Excessive beauty was not a good thing, especially when one did not have the ability to protect one's beauty. However, with Empress Dowager Ida's protection, there wouldn't be any problems. Jiang Wan smiled faintly and looked at the chessboard under the apricot tree. Both the white and black pieces had been used up. It appeared to be a mess, but the predicament had already been set. The white pieces no longer had a way out, and the black pieces were full of murderous intent at every step. Everything was going well. Even though he hadn't been in the capital for 3 years, the chess game was still progressing at a steady pace. She walked to the front of the emperor and bowed, "Your son greets father." At this moment, there was a gust of wind. Everyone narrowed their eyes subconsciously. When he opened his eyes again, he saw a red-clothed figure walking over from afar in front of the 100-mile ceremonial procession and thousands of elite troops. In Xian Hua's mind, Jiang Ruan's enchanting face that could topple cities suddenly appeared, and his breathing stagnated. That's right, he was a man. Seeing such a stunning beauty, it would be a lie if he said that he wasn't moved. Moreover, the support behind Jiang Ruan could not be underestimated. In the past 3 years, the struggle between him and Xianli for the throne had become more and more intense. On the surface, the more brotherly and respectful they appeared, the more they wished to kill each other in private. If he had Jiang Xing in the Zhao clan, wouldn't that be a bargaining chip? Moreover, Empress Dowager Ida had taken a liking to Hong and Junzhu. The 2 palace maids looked at Jiang Ruan calmly, as if they were certain that Jiang Ruan would not dare to refuse. In fact, in the palace, Princess Hee was domineering and the emperor doted on her. Therefore, everyone in the palace had to give Princess Hee face. Jiang Ruan had just returned to the capital, so she certainly did not dare to offend the princess. Everything had just begun. For the past 3 years, she had lived a peaceful life in the ancestral temple, listening to Zen and chanting scriptures every day. She was completely unaware of what was happening outside. In the eyes of Empress Dowager Ida, she was just like any other girl in the boudoir. However, Jiang Ruan knew that there had never been a day when the hatred had truly been removed from her heart. She knelt in front of the golden body of Buddha with a pious expression, but in her heart, she was cursing. She smiled amiably at the little monk who was sweeping the floor, but in her heart, she was thinking about how to destroy all those people step by step. Every night, she leaned against the headboard of the bed and the scenes from her previous life flashed before her eyes. The more furious she was, the gentler her expression became. Princess Hee smiled slightly. If that's the case, many thanks to fifth brother. The journey back to the capital was about to begin. She wondered if those people were prepared to go to hell. Xian Hua stared blankly for a moment, then said angrily, "What do you mean by this? Since you want to be my imperial consort, how can you ruin your reputation?" Hong and Princess, everyone was frightened and moved. Following closely behind the splendid carriage was a soft, crabapple-colored sedan chair. The sedan chair was equally magnificent and majestic, emitting a faintly discernible fragrance. Not knowing why, everyone unconsciously looked towards the sedan chair curiously, as if they were expecting someone to walk out. It just so happened that the weather was good. Spring had arrived earlier than usual, and the sun in the morning seemed to know that today was a big day. It was even brighter than the day before. Xianhua's eyes flashed slightly. What you said is very good, but this is too risky. She had also been waiting for this moment for a long time. Momo, it is not that I am willful. Xia Yan's eyes flashed with a trace of sadness. He only knows that today is the day that the Empress Dowager returns to the palace, but he does not know that today is also the day that Su-er returns to the Fu. Su-er has stayed in the ancestral temple for 3 years, and I have not seen her for 3 years. But you see, today he has not even asked a single question. Does he still have Su-er in his heart? That was a beauty that could not be found in the mortal world. However, she had already experienced this person's true colors. Jiang Wan smiled faintly and turned her head away, unable to conceal the disgust in her eyes. Tomorrow, they would depart for the capital. Once they returned to the palace, everyone would know that this newly promoted princess of the great Jin dynasty would have a different status from the past. Thus, hard work paid off. 10 days ago, Empress Dowager Ida personally presided over her hairpin ceremony and sent a letter to the capital to request that she be conferred the title of princess. The emperor approved and bestowed the title of Hong'an princess. If one were to say who Xia Yan was most worried about, it was still Jiang Su. She had never replied to the letters she had sent to Jiang Su, only sending a brief message saying that she was well. She was not even willing to see Xia Yan. Today, Jiang Su had returned to the capital after 3 years. Xia Yan was overjoyed, but she did not expect that Jiang Quan would pour cold water on her. So what if I don't go? Jiang Wan looked down at them condescendingly. Under the gaze of that pair of charming and ice-cold eyes, the 2 palace maids only felt that the 2 of them were insignificant ants in Jiang Ruan's eyes, that even a glance was superfluous. Jiang Wan said, "This princess and Princess He are of the same rank, and Princess He has no right to order this princess. You are just servants. I wonder if master has taught you the etiquette of the palace, or do you think that this princess is easy to bully?" This kind of woman was worthy of the 4 words, demoness who brings calamity to the nation. Jiang Wan nodded, a layer of pride slowly rising in her heart. 5th Prince Xianhua's eyes also brightened. Needless to say, the crown prince's eyes flashed with a trace of amazement. Even the mediocre 4th Prince Xianlang could not help but reveal a trace of admiration at this moment. That person naturally referred to 5th Yin Hong Ying. In the past few years, Hong Ying's position in the Jiangfu had become more and more stable, almost to the point where she could compete with Xia Yan as an equal. Although senior servant Li said this, at this moment, Xia Yan was in a fit of anger, so how could she listen? She only angrily said, "Pei, you're just a prostitute from a brothel. What are you pretending to be virtuous and virtuous for? In the end, you still rely on seducing men." In the 11th year of Xuanda, Empress Dowager Ida returned to the capital. Even the emperor could not help but slightly narrow his eyes. Jiang Wan looked at them with a smile and did not say a word. Unexpectedly, she did not look anxious at all. After waiting for a while, Jiang Ruan's posture did not change. One of the palace maids became somewhat impatient and said, "Is Miss Jiang trying to make things difficult for us servants?" Jiang Quan frowned slightly. "You do not need to do these trivial matters, just leave it to the servants." His gaze fell on Xia Yan's lower abdomen. "You should take care of your body." The eunuch dragged out his voice and said, "We respectfully welcome Hong'an princess back to the capital." She slowly caressed her lower abdomen. After just 3 months, the fetus seemed to be very stable. The doctor had come to take a look and said that it was very likely to be a boy. If it really was a boy, it meant that she would be able to gain the upper hand in the confrontation with Hong Ying. Xia Yan lowered her head to look at her slightly bulging belly and said, "My son, you must be safe." Xia Yan's brows suddenly flashed with a trace of joy. Speaking of which, these days, I have not arranged a tongfang for master. Lin Lang, who is by your side, is an obedient, impudent. Jiang Ruan's tone suddenly became solemn. Her expression no longer had that sweet smile of a moment ago. She coldly said, "Who gave you the courage to shout at this princess?" In the past few years, she had been raised by Empress Dowager Yida's side and had never deliberately inquired about outside news. The Jiang family had never sent any letters. Sometimes, when Empress Dowager Yida received news of the battlefield between Tianjin and the Great Jin dynasty, she would also call her over to listen. What was gratifying was that in the past 3 years, Jiang Xing had repeatedly turned the tide of battle and made extraordinary contributions. He had fought side by side with Guan Lianghan, and his bravery was not inferior to Guan Lianghan's. In addition, every time the enemy launched a surprise attack, he would always strike first and gain the upper hand. Thus, the title of the Great Jin dynasty's other god of war fell on Jiang Xing's shoulders. The splendid carriage stopped in front of the palace gates. Exquisitely dressed palace maids hurriedly stepped forward to lift the beaded curtains on the carriage. Empress Dowager Yida was dressed in a golden court dress, enameled with turquoise gold buttons, gorgeous and noble. She was supported as she walked out. She faintly glanced at the crowd. Just one glance was enough to make them feel an irresistible pressure. Princess He sneered, "She deserves to die." What kind of person was Xianhua? He had countless concubines in his fu. Just the tongfang alone filled the entire courtyard. Once Jiang Ruan entered the 5th prince's fu, that group of women would certainly not spare her. At that time, her reputation would be ruined, and Empress Dowager Yida would certainly not treat her as warmly as before. What the Great Jin dynasty despised the most were women who violated public morals and morals. In the future, it would be difficult for her to advance. Once Xianhua was tired of playing with Jiang Ruan, it would be easy for him to deal with her again. Jiang Ruan accompanied the Empress Dowager in the Palace of Compassionate and Peaceful for a while before the Empress Dowager said that she was tired. She allowed Jiang Ruan to return to the Jiang Fu and bring back some rewards. This was Empress Dowager Yida supporting her. Jiang Ruan smiled and thanked her before leaving the Palace of Compassionate and Peaceful. From afar, a young girl dressed as a maidservant trotted over. Her smile was sweet and adorable as she called out from afar, "Miss, Mississippi." Xianhua sneered, "10th sister, don't try to fool Gidge. Speak, what is your purpose?" The 2 palace maids were startled, but before they could speak, they heard Jiang Ruan continue, "This Junju was personally requested by His Majesty, the Empress Dowager, and His Majesty bestowed this name. When the 2 of you see this Junju, you address this Junju as Miss Jiang. Could it be that, as palace maids, you still don't know this Junju's identity? Or, in your hearts, you only recognize Junju as your master, Princess He?" Jiang Ruan followed the palace maid who had led the way to the imperial garden. In front of her, 2 unfamiliar palace maids walked over. These 2 were dressed in extraordinary attire, so they were definitely not ordinary palace maids. When they saw Jiang Ruan, they bowed slightly and said, "Miss Jiang, Junju invites you over for a chat." Jiang Ruan smiled slightly, "It's been 3 years. Xia Yan slowly calmed down and sighed, "You're right, that lowly woman is just a chicken that can't lay eggs, there's nothing to fear. Now that Chao is slowly improving, in the future, he will be able to help the one in my belly a little." The palace maid who had led the way was also startled. Just now, she had been in a dilemma. Although Jiang Ruan was now rumored to be deeply favored by Empress Dowager Yida, Princess He had also been favored in the palace for so many years. If she were to offend Princess He because of Jiang Ruan, she would feel somewhat uneasy. Looking at Jiang Ruan's always smiling appearance, her intuition told her that this Hong and Junju was a soft persimmon. Unexpectedly, when Jiang Yuan spoke at this time, the palace maid suddenly realized that Jiang Yuan was not someone who could be easily bullied. Thus, she straightened her back and said, "That's right, my two elder sisters, when you see Junju, why don't you pay your respects to her?" Time flowed like water, fleeting. For the past 3 years, she had followed the Empress Dowager in the ancestral temple, eating vegetarian, chanting sutras, and walking in plain clothes. Every day, she accompanied the Empress Dowager by her side. Because she was extremely patient, she was not like ordinary young girls who would become impatient when they listened to the great master chanting sutras. For the past 3 years, bit by bit, she had infiltrated Empress Dowager Ida's life, quietly fawning over her. Slowly, Empress Dowager Ida accepted her. She was not Princess Yuanrong, but she also made Empress Dowager Ida feel like she was treating her own daughter. She slowly approached from afar, her fiery red skirt fluttering behind her. As she got closer, she discovered that this woman's makeup was exquisite and gorgeous. The corners of her eyes were finely sprinkled with gold powder, enshrouding her breathtaking beauty. The corners of her eyes were faintly raised, the corners of her lips curled into a smile, and her hands were folded in front of her. She was dignified and charming, cold and flirtatious. The two palace maids stared blankly, clenched their teeth, and greeted Jiang Yuan with the courtesy that servants used to greet a Junju. They said, "Just now, we were rash. But Hong and Junju, our Junju is still waiting for you. If you do this, isn't it a little? Why does fifth brother need to say this?" A smile blossomed on Heyi's beautiful face, but it was as glaring as a poisonous snake. Hong and Junju is not an ordinary person. If fifth brother can marry her, sooner or later, Jiang Xing will command one of the 3 armies. That old man Zhao Guang will also follow you, and with the Empress Dowager's support, won't fifth brother be tempted? Fifth brother, how can you be so naive? Princess Heyi sighed. Since younger sister has told fifth brother about this method, if fifth brother does not agree, younger sister will definitely tell eighth brother. If fifth brother is not willing, and eighth brother is willing, then Hong and Junju can only marry eighth brother. A demoness who brings calamity to the nation. Everyone's mind simultaneously floated up with the same thought. A slender jade-like hand stretched out. Xian Li stared blankly. If 3 years ago, he had believed that Jiang Yuan hated him because of Jiang Su, then today, 3 years later, he had clearly realized that Jiang Yuan did not hate him because of Jiang Su. Jiang Yuan hated him from the bottom of her heart, as if she had an innate hatred for him. He believed that he had not done anything to make Jiang Yuan hate him, but every time Jiang Yuan saw him, she showed alienation and disgust. She sat down in a daze. Seeing this, Li Momo, who was at the side, hurriedly handed her a cup of red date honey water. "Furen, don't be angry with master, be careful not to hurt the little young master in your belly." "Deal." Xian Hua readily agreed. "I only want the person and power, the process doesn't matter. In the future, if 10th sister wants it, I will naturally be happy to do her a favor." The palanquin also stopped. The movement of the palanquin was incomparably gentle, as if it was afraid of startling the person in the palanquin. It made people's hearts itch even more. Immediately after, 2 maids dressed in green walked over. They were both tall and had delicate and pretty faces. One looked calmer, while the other looked more shrewish. Both of them stood on both sides of the palanquin and stretched out their hands to support the person in the palanquin. The young lady in black had already placed the last piece. She raised her head, revealing a face so beautiful that it seemed as if it could not be found in the mortal world. Even in the ancestral temple, she wore plain clothes, but there was still a kind of gorgeous beauty that could not be concealed. Her small face, which used to be slightly childish, was now emaciated, becoming more and more like the size of a palm. Her pair of eyes were crystal clear and moist, like flowing spring water, and also like transparent amber gems. The redder her lips, the whiter her teeth. Even if her hair was loosely tied up in a bun, there was still a kind of languid charm. Her gaze once again swept over another familiar figure beside the emperor. That young man stood ramrod straight and had a kind of aloof and noble air. Jiang Wan noticed that his clothes had already changed to first-rank court attire. She walked forward step by step, her smile deepening. Lu Min had finally become the current imperial tutor, a first-rank official. When her gaze fell on Great Master Huiju, who was standing not far from the emperor, she smiled again. Huiju was still as benevolent as she remembered, but compared to 3 years ago, his brows were more peaceful and stable. At first glance, he really looked like the Buddha that was worshipped in the temple. 3 years ago, when Jiang Wan left, she had asked Jiang Xinji to bring a piece of paper to Great Master Huiju. On it, she had written down in detail the major events that might happen in the capital in the next 3 years. Huiju himself was clever and knew how to wait for the right opportunity to act. The palace maid who had led the way was also in a difficult position. Presumably, Princess Hei usually relied on Xu Fei to run amok in the palace. This palace maid was also very taboo. Jiang Wan stood up, and from the corner of her eyes, she did not see Xiao Xiao's figure in the surroundings. Her heart was puzzled. According to common sense, with Xiao Xiao's status, he would definitely attend today. Now that she could not see any trace of Xiao Xiao anywhere, she could not help but think of the words Xiao Xiao had said before he left, "I want to make another trip to the Miao Stockade village." Since ancient times, the Miao Stockade village had been very dangerous. Could it be that some accident had occurred? Xianhua looked at Princess Hei for a moment, and suddenly laughed. It is said that the most poisonous thing is a woman's heart, but today is the first time I have seen 10th younger sister also have such a shrewd mind. Xianhua's expression changed, but he still said, "So what?" At that time, Hong and Princess rejected the marriage in front of the palace banquet. Now that imperial father has allowed her to choose her own husband, she will certainly not choose Lao Ba. Rise. The emperor said indifferently. Lu Zhu stuck out her tongue. Compared to the naive and unaffected little girl 3 years ago, she had now grown up a little and appeared more witty and likable. She slowed down her pace and walked to the side of the young girl in black. "This servant is too happy. Everything has been packed, and the Empress Dowager has already instructed that we will depart early tomorrow morning." Xianli frowned, thought about it, and suddenly laughed again. No matter, even so, he still had the confidence to make Jiang Ruan give up her heart. How could the woman he fancied escape so easily? In the imperial garden, Princess Hei's slender finger tapped on the cup in front of her. "Fifth brother, have you not thought about it?" The capital was bustling with activity that day, and there was no lack of people discussing this matter in the teahouses and restaurants. Empress Dowager Ida had left the capital 3 years ago and had only returned today. It was said that the emperor had brought all the civil and military officials to welcome her, and it was an unprecedented grand occasion. The common people could not see this grand occasion, but they still had to think about it in their hearts. It was as if they could see it with their own eyes. Princess Hei nestled next to concubine Shu. When she saw this young girl, a trace of hostility arose in her heart. She thought that in the capital of the great Jin dynasty, her appearance was already extremely beautiful. Who knew that when this young girl in red appeared, she was like the moonlight and fireflies? Her appearance was simply like a joke. When she heard the name of Hong and Princess, she immediately clenched her fists, and a trace of resentment flashed across her face. The Empress Dowager had already recognized her as an adopted daughter, which meant that she no longer had to worry about being sent to the palace one day, becoming the emperor's woman, and stepping into the same fate as in her previous life. Empress Dowager Ida had done this precisely for her sake. Seeing that her appearance was becoming more and more beautiful with each passing day, she also knew that Jiang Ruan's ambition did not lie here. Thus, she simply requested for a conferment to completely cut off the possibility of Jiang Ruan entering the palace. If someone passed by at this moment, they would certainly be shocked. Xia Yan, who had always been renowned in the capital as a talented woman, was spitting out such words. She really was like a shrew in the countryside. After that, there was a monotonous and repetitive ceremony. After the complicated ceremony was completed, Jiang Ruan accompanied Empress Dowager Ida back to the Palace of Compassionate and Peaceful. After 3 years, Empress Dowager Ida was somewhat happy to return to the palace. When the palace maids and eunuchs saw Jiang Ruan, they all behaved respectfully. Everyone knew that this Hong An princess was now a favorite of Empress Dowager Ida, and was also the apple of great General Zhao's eye. She also had an older brother who was known as the war god of the great Jin dynasty. It was no different from being doted on by tens of thousands of people and could not be offended. There was no need to mention Jiang Quan, who was in the crowd. When he saw the woman's features, he already knew that it was Jiang Ruan. His body could not help but tremble a little. He had always known that Jiang Ruan was born beautiful, and that she had inherited 70% of Zhao Mei's looks. However, he did not know that when this daughter grew up, she would be like a young phoenix that had shed her tender and immature feathers. Her entire body would be full of elegance, and her beauty would cause the downfall of a nation. This kind of beauty was enough to make men waver, but what she would bring to the Jiangfu might not necessarily be glory. Seeing Xia Yan like this, Li Momo hurriedly comforted her. "Furen, there is no need to bicker with that screwdriver. No matter how much he is doted on, if he cannot bear a child, isn't he at Furen's mercy? Men all seek novelty. Master was only momentarily bewitched by that foxy charmer. When she grows old and loses her beauty, and without a child by her side, she will certainly not have a good ending. When Furen gives birth to little young Master for Master, Master will naturally know that only Furen treats him sincerely. Furen has little young Master by her side, what is there to be afraid of? It's simple, he Yi's beautiful face twisted in an instant. I want that slut to lose all standing and reputation." Thinking of this, her brows involuntarily furrowed. After thinking for a while, she rejected this conjecture in her heart. In her previous life, Xiao Xiao had not only lived up to this point. Presumably, there should not be any accidents. She was still immersed in her own thoughts. When she raised her head, she was met with a pair of smiling eyes. It was Xianli. She lightly brushed the chessboard, and as her wide sleeves passed, the chess pieces on the chessboard tumbled, and the winner and loser were no longer visible. "Fifth brother, don't be too sure. Now, if you rashly ask to marry Hong and Junzhu, how could the Zhao family and Jiang Xing be so willing? Moreover, the marriage is now in Jiang Ruan's hands. What if Jiang Ruan took the initiative to fall in love with fifth brother, and offered herself to sleep with him? At that time, in broad daylight, even if Jiang Ruan cried and begged not to marry, she would still have no choice but to marry. The imperial family would not tolerate such a shameless woman. If fifth brother were to speak up about this matter, and be willing to marry her as the official wife, how could the Zhao family and Jiang Xing not be deeply grateful to you? Since fifth brother has obtained benefits, the great Jin court will also know that Hong and Junzhu is not content with her lot on the surface. This is a win-win situation." Xianli looked at her, his eyes incomparably gentle. His white robes fluttered in the wind, and he really looked like a young master. They had not seen each other for 3 years, and he also looked more mature than 3 years ago. Like a piece of ancient jade that had been polished more smoothly, he was even more attractive. Xia Yan's tone was so sorrowful that Li Momo hurriedly said, "Furen must not say such things again. If that person hears it, I am afraid that she will stir up trouble in front of Master again." "There is no need," Jiang Quan waved his hand. "Also, Hong Ying, what would it look like if it were to spread? I will leave first. Today, His Majesty has decreed that I cannot delay the time." Finished speaking, he personally buttoned up the top 2 buttons on his collar and hurried out. In the Jiangfu, Xia Yan was gently tidying up Jiang Quan's official robes. She smiled and said, I have already ordered the small kitchen to make master's favorite osmanthus chicken today. The brows of the young girl in black slightly twitched, and the two slightly older servant girls standing on either side glared at the young girl who had trotted over. Lu Zhu, how can you be so rash again? Lower your voice, you will disturb Mrs. Chess. Under the tree was a bluestone table with a cup of fragrant tea, and the exquisite hibiscus cake inside the jade butterfly. A gentle breeze blew past, and bursts of flower petals rained down. The petals fell in profusion, landing on the body of a person under the tree. Empress Dowager Ida lay on the couch and smiled faintly. Ruan girl, you have a capable older brother. Chapter 105. The plain carriage slowly stopped at the entrance of the Jiangfu. Xia Yan, who had gone out to greet them, trembled as she saw two servant girls supporting an elegant young girl out of the carriage. That young girl was Jiang Su Su. Compared to 3 years ago, Jiang Su Su had grown a little taller. Perhaps it was because she had stayed in the family temple for a long time, but she seemed to have a stable temperament. The arrogance and willfulness of the past was completely gone, leaving only a faint sense of virtuous aloofness. There was a smile on her lips, and the scar on her face could not be seen at all. Her facial features were vivid and beautiful. For some unknown reason, she still had an elegant appearance, but it seemed to contain a kind of faint seduction. If one were to seriously look at her every move, they would actually be somewhat distracted. When Xia Yan first saw her face, her heart was filled with joy. Holding her waist, she clumsily took a few steps forward before looking at Jiang Su Su's face. How did your face get better? The doctor who had visited the Fu had said that the scar on Jiang Su Su's face would not heal. In the future, if some expensive medicinal herbs were found, perhaps it would fade a little. But now, Jiang Su Su's skin was like a peeled egg, there was no trace of disfigurement. Jiang Su Su looked at her and smiled lightly. When the time is up, it will naturally be better. Her eyes lightly glanced at Xia Yan, and Xia Yan actually felt her heart sway. She did not know why, but she only felt that the Jiang Su Su in front of her was strangely unfamiliar, like a completely different person from the past. But upon closer inspection, it was still the original Jiang Su Su. She suppressed the suspicions in her heart and said, It's good that you are back. These 3 years, you have been so heartless that you refused to see mother. Jiang Su Su turned a deaf ear to her words. Her gaze passed over Xia Yan and landed on a soft sedan in front of the Fu's door. It was a soft sedan the color of begonia, carried by 4 palace guards. The sedan was exquisite and gorgeous, and the identity of the person in the sedan was not indicated. Along the way, many commoners followed to see which Fu's nobleman was from. The sedan stopped at the entrance of the Jiangfu. Jiang Su Su stared at the sedan without saying a word. From the back of the sedan came 2 finely dressed servant girls. Smiling, they opened the bead curtains of the sedan and welcomed the person inside. The red-clothed girl's appearance was extremely beautiful, and there was a soul-stirring beauty in her movements. She walked slowly, and with every step she took, Xia Yan's fingerprints dug deeper into her palm. Finally, the girl in red walked to stand in front of Xia Yan and said with a smile, Wan Yang, greets mother. Second sister, long time no see. Xia Yan only felt a gust of melancholy in her chest rushing towards her face. Naturally, the news of Jiang Ruan's grand occasion in the palace had spread. Thinking of this, Xia Yan wished that she could tear Jiang Ruan to shreds. How could such good luck not fall on Jiang Su Su's head? Now that Jiang Su Su had just returned to the Fu, Jiang Ruan had chosen this time to come over. When the two sides were compared, the people outside could see it in their eyes. Who knew what kind of rumors would spread in the capital tomorrow? People always step on the weak and flatter the strong. Both of them had entered the family temple, but Jiang Ruan had returned in glory and splendor, while Jiang Su Su had only been in a horse carriage. In her heart, she was about to explode. Jiang Wan had obviously done it on purpose. Jiang Su quietly looked at Jiang Wan and suddenly smiled. "Dejia, long time no see, you have become even more beautiful." Her expression was calm, and she really had a somewhat otherworldly attitude. But for some reason, her entire body exuded a special aura that even women could not help but feel a little moved. If one had to use a word to describe her, it would be a bewitching nun. Yes, Jiang Su's body still carried the fragrance of sandalwood. Her clothes were green, and she wore no makeup. She really did give off the feeling of an immortal nun. But each and every one of her movements actually carried a different kind of allure. Do not look, if you look, you will lose your soul." Jiang Wan withdrew her gaze and smiled slightly. "Second sister is far away and does not know. Now, the Empress Dowager has asked for me to be conferred the title of Hong and Junju. Although you and I are both sisters, and mother and I are also mother and daughter, rules cannot be abolished. If word of this gets out, I am afraid that it will be said that we are looking down on the imperial family. Therefore, Wan Yang boldly reminded me that in the future, it is better to establish the rules that should be established. Otherwise, if the imperial censors hear of this, they will have to report it to father." Jiang Su's originally calm face, when she heard these words, the muscles on her cheeks fiercely twitched, and unexpectedly became somewhat unnatural. She slowly raised her head to look at Jiang Wan, and in a split second, the emotions in her eyes fluctuated like the wind and clouds. Finally, it returned to calmness. She smiled slightly and curtsied in front of Jiang Wan. "Sun Yang greets Junju." Jiang Wan smiled and gestured for her to stand up. Xia Yan almost ground her teeth to pieces. Jiang Wan thought for a moment, and her gaze fell thoughtfully on Xia Yan's lower abdomen. "Mother, you can dispense with the formalities. Now that mother is pregnant, if your body is harmed, I am afraid that Wan Yang will not be able to escape the blame." When Xia Yan saw her gaze, she was frightened. Her hands subconsciously covered her lower abdomen, and she stared at her warily, forcing a smile. "What are you saying?" Jiang Ruan's smile became even more gentle. "Mother is so protective. Those who don't know would think that I am going to do something to the child in mother's stomach. Mother worries too much." She turned her head and happened to see the way Jiang Su was looking at Xia Yan's stomach. Her eyes were astonishingly bright, and she actually felt a chill run down her spine. Jiang Wan secretly became vigilant, and said with a smile, looking at second younger sister's appearance, "It seems that mother is also very fond of the little fellow in mother's stomach. It seems that mother will soon be able to add a little brother to the fu." After saying this, she did not wait any longer, and with a smile, she ordered the servant girl to follow her into the fu. Xia Yan subconsciously turned to look at Jiang Su's gaze and was shocked by what she saw. The way Jiang Su looked at her lower abdomen was not one bit gentle or cute. It was as if she was not staring at her lower abdomen, but rather at a delicious dish, ready to pounce on it in the next second. He would eat her up cleanly. Xia Yan now regarded the child in her stomach as her lifeblood. Seeing Jiang Su's frightening gaze, she immediately took a step back. Her movement was too big, and Jiang Su regained her senses. The greed in her eyes immediately disappeared, and she smiled. "Mother, I will also go in first." After saying this, she looked meaningfully at Xia Yan's lower abdomen, and slowly walked into the fu. Xia Yan stood rooted to the ground, still thinking about Jiang Su's gaze. She did not know why, but her heart turned cold. After staying in the fu for a few days, nothing out of the ordinary happened. The Empress Dowager casually rewarded them and brought them back to the Jiang Fu, but unexpectedly, no one dared to have any ideas. Jiang Chao followed Xianli outside all day and was busy, so when he entered the fu, he naturally did not see him. Moreover, Jiang Quan would not take the initiative to look for his daughter, Jiang Wan, to have a heart-to-heart talk. Lu Zhu heard that in the past 3 years, Jiang Dan had become more and more reluctant to go out, and her temperament had become more introverted. The old Jiang madam's body had also begun to show signs of decline. On the day she returned to the Fu, she had only called Jiang Ruan over to talk for a while before she became tired of talking. Xia Yan's pregnancy had already passed the first 3 months, so if she was carefully nurtured, she would naturally be fine. In her previous life, the child in Xia Yan's stomach was ultimately not born, and she miscarried a month later. At that time, it was discovered that it was 15-young Hong Ying who had done it. Jiang Quan was furious, and locked Hong Ying in the woodshed. However, Hong Ying found a rope and hung herself, and died in the woodshed. Looking at it now, there were all sorts of suspicious points. Although it was extremely likely that Hong Ying had done such a thing, hanging herself was not something that she would do with her temperament. In this life, even if she followed the traces of her previous life, Xia Yan's child would not be able to survive. It was just that Hong Ying, she was also very curious. Was it really Hong Ying who had done it? As she pondered, Lian Xiao lifted the curtain and said, "Miss, 15-young is here." Jiang Ruan raised her eyebrows. Hong Ying's movements were extremely fast. She ordered someone to welcome Hong Ying in. Compared to 3 years ago, Hong Ying's clothing was much more exquisite. Although it still did not appear luxurious, the material and jewelry she wore were all good stuff. It seemed that Jiang Quan had treated her well these past 3 years. When she thought about it, this was also the time when she had just returned to the Jiangfu in her previous life. At that time, Hong Ying had already reached the point where she could stand up to Xia Yan as an equal. Now that Xia Yan was pregnant, it would be more convenient for Hong Ying to serve Jiang Quan. Hong Ying somewhat cautiously sat down opposite Jiang Ruan. These past 3 years, she had lived extremely comfortably and contentedly. Xia Yan's previous actions had already caused Jiang Quan to have a knot in his heart. The two of them were not very close, so she had an opportunity to take advantage of. These past 3 years, Jiang Quan had increasingly valued her. Who would have thought that Xia Yan would become pregnant at this critical juncture? Fortunately, Jiang Ruan had returned. Hong Ying always had an inexplicable reverence for Jiang Ruan. Ever since 3 years ago, when she had witnessed this seemingly gentle eldest Mrs. various formidable methods in the Fu, she had wanted to rope her in. Now, it had been proven that her foresight was indeed correct. Jiang Ruan had gained the favor of Empress Dowager Ida, Jiang Xing had been promoted step by step, and Zhao Guang had also valued her. Now that she had become a Junju, based on her methods, wouldn't this Fu be her world? Thinking of this, Xia Yan's expression became respectful and she humbly said, "This lowly concubine greets Junju. Yin does not need to be so courteous." Jiang Ruan picked up the teapot in front of her. "Yin and I are all on the same side, there is no need to be overly courteous." She looked at the woman in front of her with a smile. "We have not seen each other for 3 years, Yin seems to be living well. It is all thanks to eldest Miss's good fortune." Hong Ying smiled and said, "Eldest Miss is the one with good fortune." Jiang Ruan smiled and chatted with her. Not long after, as expected, Hong Ying tentatively asked, "Does eldest Miss know that Furen is pregnant? Who in this Fu does not know that father has a son in his old age? Ruan Yang is not deaf or blind." Jiang Ruan's tone contained a hint of mockery. Immediately, the corners of Hong Ying's eyes twitched. However, the show still had to continue. A trace of worry suddenly appeared on her face. "Speaking of this, eldest Miss must laugh. This is precisely what this lowly concubine is worried about." "Oh. What is there for Yin to worry about?" Jiang Ruan asked with a smile. "This lowly concubine regards eldest Miss as an intimate person, so I thickened my face and told eldest Mississippi. Although Furen's pregnancy is good, these past few years, because of Master, Furen has treated this lowly concubine with many misunderstandings. If young Master is born, who knows how this lowly concubine will react?" Hong Ying's expression was anxious, as if she was very uneasy. Yin Yang's words are too serious. Jiang Wan smiled and comforted her. Mother is compassionate, how could she react? Furthermore, father would not leave it be. If Yin Yang is wronged, father will be the first to not let her off. Hong Ying took out a handkerchief and wiped her eyes, wiping away the needless tears. She smiled bitterly and said, Master treats this lowly concubine well. This lowly concubine is blessed. But when a woman gives birth, it is always extremely dangerous. To put it bluntly, if something were to happen to Furen, and the blame is placed on this lowly concubine will be unable to voice out her bitterness. I am afraid that no matter what, I will not be able to wash away the injustice. This lowly concubine will be alone in this fu for the rest of my life. If I am really charged with that crime, I am afraid. I am afraid that even in death, I will not be able to leave a complete corpse. Jiang Wan quietly looked at Hong Ying. Let's not talk about whether Hong Ying's words were true or false for the time being, but it could be seen that she was an intelligent person. She had even thought of this point. But since she had thought of this, how could she have fallen into Xia Yan's trap in her previous life? Jiang Wan also did not believe that in her previous life, it was Hong Ying who caused Xia Yan to miscarry. In reality, Hong Ying was an extremely intelligent woman. She was very good at judging the situation. If there was a risk, she would not do something that she was uncertain about. Since this was the case, then the miscarriage was nothing more than a crime that Xia Yan had imposed on Hong Ying. But how did Xia Yan's child in her previous life die? Although she thought this way, Jiang Wan still smiled at Hong Ying. Yin Yang's words are really too frightening. There are so many people in the fu to protect Furen's belly, what is there for Yin Yang to be afraid of? Ruan Yang feels that Yin Yang's top priority is not to study the child in Furen's belly, but to have a child of your own. She was an unmarried girl in the boudoir, yet she was openly discussing the matter of giving birth with the Fu's Yin Yang. Her expression did not show the slightest shyness, as if it was extremely natural. Although Hong Ying was shocked, she could not help but blush as she said, Eldest miss, it is not that lowly concubine does not want to give birth, but... Girls born in a brothel had to take a kind of medicine from a young age. That medicine could make a girl's body fair and smooth, and it could also make a girl's body emit a strange fragrance. This was naturally a method used by girls to win over their benefactors. However, this kind of medicine also had a side effect, and that was, it would destroy fertility. When Hong Ying had first entered the fu, she had indeed only wanted to gain Jiang Quan's favor and obtain Jiang Quan's affection. She had succeeded, but the longer she stayed in the fu, the stronger her desire to have a child became. A man's favor might not last long, but if she had a child, if it was a son, her status would rise by a large margin. She did not seek to topple Xia Yan in one move, because Xia Yan still had the Xia Fu behind her. However, she wanted Jiang Quan to think that she and Xia Yan were on equal footing, and that was also good. Every time Jiang Quan rested in her courtyard, Xia Yan would order Li Momo to send over some soup to prevent pregnancy, and watch her drink it. Every time Li Momo left, she would dig her throat and force herself to spit out all the soup. Even so, when she was young, she had taken too much medicine in the brothel. She had already secretly asked the doctor about it, and the doctor said that the chances of her conceiving were very small. Not being able to conceive a child was a thorn in her heart, and coincidentally, Xia Yan was pregnant at this time. Seeing that she had painstakingly achieved everything in front of her, did she have to return everything to its original state? She was not reconciled. But what could she do? She would always be unable to conceive. Jiang Wan unhurriedly picked up the teacup and took a sip, and said indifferently, "Why can't I conceive? In this world, there is no woman who cannot conceive." Hong Ying stared blankly, and raised her head to look at Jiang Wan. "What does eldest miss mean?" Jiang Wan looked at her with pity. "What to do, fifth yin yang, Wan Yang also sympathizes with you. But if you want to live safely in the fu, you must first have a child. Do you understand? If you want a child, then you will certainly have a child. Hong Ying stared blankly for a moment before she digested the meaning of Jiang Ruan's words. She was immediately shocked, and looked at the woman in front of her as if she did not know her. Eldest Miss, Jiang Quan smiled faintly. In the end, it is Yin Yang's life, Wan Yang has no right to intervene. Hong Ying's heart was in a mess. The meaning of Jiang Ruan's words actually vaguely revealed one meaning: substitute a flower for a tree. If this matter was successful, her position in the Fu would indeed rise to a higher level. But the risk of doing so was too great. Once it was discovered, it would be a great crime to confuse the heirs of the clan, and she would be beaten to death. She was shocked that Jiang Wan had so easily said this matter, and felt that it was inconceivable. Jiang Wan was also a daughter of the Jiang Fu. Why would she take the initiative to propose to use someone else's blood to inherit the position of the Jiang Fu? Had she ever regarded herself as a member of the Jiang family? Hong Ying's mind was restless, and for a moment, she could not think of any clues. Although Jiang Ruan's words were frightening, they also inexplicably tempted her. It was just that it was difficult for her to make up her mind, and she could only hurriedly say, "What eldest miss has said, this lowly concubine has heard it. This lowly concubine just remembered that I still have some things to do, so I will not disturb you." Jiang Wan did not urge her to stay, and said with a smile, "Yin Yang, think about it carefully, there is no need to be impatient, as long as, wait until mother has an accident." When Hong Ying heard this, her heart jumped again, and she did not stay any longer. She hurriedly left with her servant girl. Lian Xiao looked at her fleeing appearance, pushed the door open, and walked in. She said, "Why is Fifth Yin Yang so scared?" Bai Ji stood silently at the side, and Lian Xiao touched her nose. She must have been frightened by Mrs. Charm. Jiang Wan smiled faintly, and Lu Zhu just happened to push the door open and walk in. With a face full of excitement and fear, she turned around and locked the door tightly. She then closed the window, drew the curtains, and walked to Jiang Ruan's side. The few people were baffled by her appearance, and Lu Zhu bent down and said in a low voice, "Miss asked Nubi to investigate the matter of Su Xin Yuan, and Nubi has clearly investigated." Jiang Wan looked at her, looking like this, "There must be something wrong, what's wrong?" "There is nothing wrong," Lu Zhu smiled mysteriously. "Nubi only heard from the kitchen that second Mrs. life in the family temple is bitter, and her body is very weak. These days, the butterflies and dragonflies around her have asked the kitchen to prepare hens, and every day, they personally make chicken soup for second miss to nourish her body." "What's so strange about this?" Lian Xiao asked. Lu Zhu shook her head. "Nubi remembers that second miss used to hate chicken soup the most. Moreover, second miss has been cultivating in the family temple. If it is really as bitter as they say, then naturally, she is very devout. But to be so devout, and once she returns to the Fu, she incessantly kills and eats meat. Isn't that? That's breaking the precept." Jiang Wan laughed in spite of herself, and looked at Lu Zhu with admiration. Lu Zhu's ability to observe people's words and body language had become stronger, and it was not easy for her to think so much. Lu Zhu saw Jiang Ruan's expression, and was very pleased with herself. She said, "Nubi felt strange, so I paid more attention, and found that it was really strange. Guess what?" Lu Zhu really treated this place as a storytelling hall, and Lian Xiao could not wait any longer. She asked anxiously, "What exactly happened?" Butterfly and Dragonfly said that they wanted to make chicken soup, but there was nothing else besides the chicken. To make soup to nourish the body, angelica and red dates were still needed. Could it be that they just put the whole chicken in? Lu Zhu said, "Nubi gave a maid in Su Xin Yuan 2 taels of silver, and let Nubi go look for it." Nubi brought along Xiao Huang, who was guarding the door. Xiao Huang's nose was very sharp, and he managed to find a dead chicken under a rose bush in Su Xin Yuan. All of its blood had been sucked dry, and its feathers were torn here and there. Lu Zhu still had some lingering fear. The wound was very hideous, and Nubi was scared just looking at it. I hurriedly buried the dead chicken, and hurried back. Lian Xiao and Bai Ji did not speak, and their expressions became grave. After a while, Lian Xiao asked, "Miss, could it be that second miss was possessed by a ghost? Otherwise, how could she know such sorcery?" "Miss, now that second miss is so strange, do you want to stay in the palace for a while?" "Second miss does not dare to follow the Empress Dowager," Bai Ji also reminded. Jiang Wan looked at Lu Zhu. "When you looked at the dead chicken, was it cut by a knife, and blood flowed in?" "No," Lu Zhu frowned. "When Nubi was young, Nubi was playful, and the reed chicken of the ant next door pecked Nubi. Nubi chased after it and took a bite. Nubi saw the wound clearly, and it was not a knife wound, nor did it look like an animal bite. It looked more like a human bite." Bai Ji and Lian Xiao sucked in a breath of cold air. Jiang Wan lowered her head in contemplation. Ever since she met Jiang Su Su at the Jiang Fu's gate a few days ago, Jiang Wan felt that there was something wrong with Jiang Su Su. Although she could not say specifically, it was as if she had changed into a different person, and there was always a strange feeling about her. These days, Jiang Su Su did not leave Su Xian Yuan, and even rarely went to see Xia Yan. She stayed in the courtyard all day, and no one knew what she was doing. This was too abnormal, so Jiang Wan ordered Lu Zhu to investigate, but she did not expect to find such a result. It was really unimaginable. "Nubi also feels that second miss is really strange," Lu Zhu said. "That day, I saw clearly that there were no scars on second miss's face. At that time, she suffered such a serious injury, but now there is no trace of it. If she is not a demon, how can she become like this?" "There are no demons and ghosts in this world," Jiang Wan said lightly. Even if there were, she was not afraid. She herself had died once, and if others knew, she would not be a demon in their eyes. But Jiang Su Su was too abnormal, and it gave her a sense of foreboding. This made her start to be vigilant. But in this matter, she could not help much. She thought for a moment and suddenly said, "Lu Zhu, go prepare a carriage, I want to go out immediately." "Where is Miss going?" Bai Ji asked curiously. Dong Feng Lu, in the imperial study, the emperor, who had always been muddle-headed, frowned and stared at the report in front of him, as if he had encountered a very thorny problem. After a while, he opened his mouth to ask, "According to what you said, there are already spies in the palace from the southern frontier." The young man standing in front of the desk was dressed in black, and he said indifferently, "Yes. These years, we have been careless. The emperor suppressed his anger. We have not yet settled the score with them, but they have already set their sights on us. They are simply reckless." "Not only that," Xiao Xiao said, "Tianjin's sudden dispatch of troops also has a lot to do with them. Those barbarians from the southern frontier are vicious and cunning, and their methods are cruel. We really did not expect them to be so scheming. Since we persuaded Tianjin, we must have given them benefits. Ah Xiao, stay in the capital and carefully investigate the matter of the spy. Even if we have to turn the entire capital upside down, we must find that person." Xiao Xiao nodded. The emperor's gaze fell on him, and he suddenly sighed. "These 3 years, you have narrowly escaped death in the Miao Stockade village. We know what you are thinking." But now, a trace of worry appeared between the emperor's brows. "The entire palace is eager for us to die earlier. We understand the thoughts of the 8th and 5th princes better than them. With the crown prince's conduct, we can only protect him for a while, but not forever. As for the civil and military officials of the court, they are nothing more than jumping clowns in our eyes. Do they really think that we do not know what they are thinking?" "Ah Xiao, you." "Your Majesty," Xiao Xiao interrupted him, "if there is nothing else, we will take our leave first. If someone passed by here, they would be surprised at the relationship between the emperor and Jining Wang." The emperor's voice paused, and after a moment, he weakly waved his hand. "Never mind, you can leave." Xiao Xiao walked to the door, only to hear the emperor's voice coming from behind him, "You are now at the age to get married. If you are interested in any family's girl, tell us, and we will arrange a marriage." The man in black did not stop, and left the imperial study without hesitation. All that was left was the emperor's sigh. Although Dongfeng Lu was the largest treasure shop in the capital, not many people went there. This was because, although the items inside were dazzling, the prices were too high, and each item was a rare treasure. Unless one was from a very wealthy family, one would not have money to buy things here. Today, there was a carriage parked at the entrance of Dongfeng Lu. The common people passing by looked over curiously, wanting to see which family's young master and young lady it was. However, when they saw a beautiful girl dressed in red get out of the carriage, everyone immediately understood. She was the popular Hong and Junzhu in the capital. Not to mention the beauty of Hong and Junzhu, now that she was favored by the Empress Dowager, the rewards were endless. Naturally, she could go to Dongfeng Lu. Everyone was envious for a while, and then they saw the girl in red enter the building with two servant girls. As Jiang Wan walked in, a beautiful maid came over and asked, "Does Miss want to look at jewelry?" Jiang Wan glanced at her, "I want to see Yi Feng." The maid was stunned, and shook her head, "Is Miss going to the wrong place?" Jiang Wan smiled, and reached into her sleeve to take out something and shook it in front of the maid, "Is it okay now?" When the maid saw the thing in Jiang Ruan's sleeve, her expression suddenly changed, and she respectfully said, "Miss, please follow this servant." Jiang Wan put the dagger that Xiao Xiao had given her back into her sleeve, and thought that it was really useful. As they walked to the weapon shop on the second floor, the maid pressed a celadon lion head on the wall. A small door opened, and an elegant room appeared next to it. The maid bowed, "Miss, please come in, Leader Yi is inside." Jiang Wan had just stepped in when she heard an impatient voice, "So meddlesome all day long, does master really intend to put me under house arrest for the rest of my life? Is it not enough for me to apologize to eldest Jiang Miss?" Jiang Wan stopped in her tracks, and asked with a smile, "Apologize for what?" Yi Feng impatiently turned around, "Of course it's the treasure." The rest of the sentence was swallowed in his mouth, and he opened his mouth in shock, "Jiang, eldest Jiang Miss?" Jiang Wan sat on the chair opposite him, and said, "I have an urgent matter to see your master." You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.